Section 1. The night two shows were born. Close your eyes for a moment, or let them rest softly on whatever dim corner of the room they find comfortable. There is nothing you need to do right now. There is nowhere you need to be. The night is quiet, and we have all the time in the world to drift through a story. A long, slow, wonderfully detailed story about two cartoons that changed television forever, and why one of them changed it just a little bit more profoundly than the other. Picture, if you will, the American television landscape in the middle years of the 1990s. It is a strange and fertile time. The networks are nervous. Cable is growing. A generation raised on Saturday morning cartoons has grown up, moved out, stayed up late, and developed opinions. They want something different from what their parents watched. They want animation that does not talk down to them, that does not wrap everything in a moral bow at the end, that trusts them to be smart or weird or both. Into this open landscape, two ideas are quietly forming in two very different places. The first is forming in the mountains of Colorado, in the minds of two young men who met at the University of Colorado at Boulder around 1992. Their names are Trey Parker and Matt Stone, and they are the kind of friends who immediately recognize in each other a shared, slightly dangerous sense of humor. They bond over Monty Python films and Primus albums, which tells you something. Monty Python means a love of absurdist logic, of building a premise to its most ridiculous extreme with complete sincerity. Primus means a willingness to be off-putting, to lean into something strange and make that strangeness into a kind of art. Parker and Stone carry both of those tendencies inside them, and when they meet, something ignites. They begin making short films together. They are not doing this because they have been told to. They are doing it because the ideas are crowding inside their heads, and the only way to get them out is to put them on film. One of these early shorts is a crudely animated holiday card, a thing made of simple paper cutout animation, featuring four boys in a Colorado mountain town, and a deeply wrong-spirited battle between Jesus Christ and Santa Claus over the true meaning of Christmas. The short is called The Spirit of Christmas. It is rough. It is cheap. The animation is barely animation at all, more like illustrated jokes that occasionally move. But it is alive in some essential way. It has a voice. You can feel the personality of the people who made it crackling through every frame. This short gets passed around on VHS tapes in 1995. This is the era before the internet makes sharing things effortless, which means the people who see it and love it enough to physically duplicate a tape and mail it to someone. That is a real endorsement. The short finds its way to a television executive at Comedy Central, a channel that is still finding itself, still figuring out what it wants to be. The executive watches it, laughs, and reaches for a phone. Comedy Central commissions a series. Parker and Stone, two young men from Colorado with a love of Monty Python and Primus and paper cutout animation, begin building out the world they have sketched in their holiday short. They give the four boys names: Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick. They place them in a fictional version of South Park, Colorado, a real small mountain town that Parker has actually been to, a place of wide open spaces and cold air and the kind of quiet that makes thoughts echo. They surround the boys with adults who are, for the most part, spectacularly bad at being adults. They set the whole thing in a world where absurdity and genuine emotion can coexist without apology. South Park premieres on August 13th, 1997. The first episode is called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. It involves alien abduction, a boy who shoots fire from his backside, and the kind of deadpan delivery that will become the show's signature. It is not for everyone. It was never meant to be for everyone. It is aggressively, specifically itself, and that specificity is exactly what makes it work. Now let your mind travel to a different place entirely. We are moving from the mountains to the East Coast, from Colorado to Connecticut, and we are following a young man named Seth MacFarlane. He is born in 1973 in Kent, Connecticut, and from a very early age, it is clear that he has a particular gift. He can draw, he can write. He has a near-perfect memory for old Hollywood musicals and golden age animation, the kind of cartoons that ran before feature films in the 1940s and 50s. He loves the way those old cartoons looked, the fluid Technicolor movement of them, the big band soundtracks, the winking awareness of the audience. MacFarlane goes to the Rhode Island School of Design, which is one of the most prestigious art schools in the country. He studies film animation and he excels. His senior thesis film is called The Life of Larry, and it features a character who is, in many ways, the prototype for what will eventually become Peter Griffin. A rotund, cheerful, not particularly bright man who blunders through domestic life with a particular combination of confidence and ineptitude. MacFarlane graduates and gets a job at Hanna-Barbera, the legendary animation studio, working on shows like Johnny Bravo and Dexter's Laboratory. He is good at his job. He learns the craft from the inside. But the idea that grew out of The Life of Larry will not leave him alone. He refines it. He develops a full family around the Larry character. He pitches it to Fox, one of the broadcast networks, and Fox is interested. Fox has already had enormous success with The Simpsons, which premiered in 1989 and proved that adult animated comedies could be not just viable but genuinely important. They're looking for more. MacFarlane's pitch feels like something they can work with. Family Guy premieres on January 31st, 1999, just after Super Bowl 33, which is one of the most valuable broadcast slots in American television. 22 million people watched that first episode. 22 million. To put that in perspective, that is not a modest debut. That is an arrival. That is the television equivalent of landing in a helicopter on the roof of the most popular building in the world. The show introduces the Griffin family. There is Peter, the good-natured, monumentally unintelligent patriarch. There is Lois, his tolerant and occasionally sharp-edged wife. There is Meg, the put-upon teenage daughter. There is Chris, the gentle, dim son. There is Stewie, the diabolical, inexplicably eloquent infant. And there is Brian, the martini-drinking, novel-writing family dog who has somehow become Peter's best friend. They live in a fictional town in Rhode Island, a town whose name we are not going to use here, because it has become so associated with the show that even saying it pulls you out of the relaxed state we are trying to build. The show has a particular rhythm. It cuts, it references, it finds its way to a joke, and then, instead of following the thread of that joke, it pivots to a flashback or a cutaway gag, a brief scene disconnected from the plot that exists purely to deliver a punchline. Some of these cutaways are genuinely funny. Some of them are spectacular. MacFarlane is talented, and the writers he assembles are talented. And at its best, in its earliest seasons, Family Guy is irreverent and sharp and fast. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Tonight we are drifting. We are letting the stories settle around us like a warm blanket on a cold Colorado night. We are noticing things slowly, without urgency. What is interesting sitting here in the quiet and thinking about these two shows arriving within 2 years of each other is how different the conditions of their creation are. South Park is born from friendship and a shared artistic vision. It is born from a VHS tape passed hand to hand, from an energy that could not be contained by a university campus and had to find an outlet. It has the feeling of something that had to exist, something that would have clawed its way into the world one way or another. Family Guy is born from talent meeting opportunity. MacFarlane is genuinely gifted. His pitch lands in the right place at the right time, following in the wake of a show, The Simpsons, that has already done the hard work of convincing networks that adult animation is viable. There is nothing cynical about this. It is how the industry works. But the origin story feels different. One show feels like it had no choice. The other feels like it made a very smart choice. That distinction between something that had to exist and something that chose to exist will matter as we go deeper into the story. It will show up in the texture of the jokes, in the way the characters are built, in the decisions both shows make when the pressure is on and they have to reveal what they really are. For now, though, just rest. Let the mountains of Colorado and the halls of a Rhode Island art school dissolve into the soft darkness behind your eyes. Two shows are born. The television world will never be quite the same. And we have a long, gentle, fascinating night ahead of us to figure out exactly why. If you are enjoying this journey so far, this is a wonderful moment to like this video and subscribe to Uncle Guy Lore. It helps more than you might think, and there is so much more where this came from. Leave a comment below telling us which show you grew up watching, or which episode first made you realize one of these cartoons was doing something genuinely special. We read every single one. Now, let us continue drifting. Section 2, The Souls Behind the Shows. There is something that happens when you watch a piece of creative work for a very long time, when you follow a show across years and decades, that you begin to feel the personality of the people who made it. Not their public persona, not the interviews they give, but the actual texture of their minds. The things they find funny, the things they find unbearable, the things they keep returning to season after season as if pulled by some gravity they cannot fully explain. You start to understand the soul of the show, and the soul of the show is always at its core, the soul of the people who created it. Tonight, we are going to spend some time with those souls, with Trey Parker and Matt Stone on one side, and Seth MacFarlane on the other. Not to make them into heroes or villains, both sides of this comparison have created genuinely remarkable things. But to understand them, because understanding the creator is the first step to understanding why the creation turns out the way it does. Let us start with Parker and Stone, because their story is the more unusual one. Trey Parker grew up in Conifer, Colorado. Not a city, not a suburb in the conventional sense, but a mountain community about 30 miles southwest of Denver at an elevation of around 8,000 feet. The air is thin up there. The winters are long and serious. The landscape is dramatic in a way that does something to the people who grow up in it. It gives them a particular relationship with scale, with the fact that human beings are small and the world is large, and a lot of the things we take seriously do not deserve to be taken seriously. Parker has talked about growing up feeling slightly outside of mainstream culture, slightly removed from the trends and anxieties that seem to consume kids in more urban or suburban places. That feeling of standing at a remove, of watching the drama of the world with a kind of amused detachment, is baked into everything he has ever made. He is also, and this is important, genuinely musically gifted. Parker can write songs. Not parody songs in the obvious sense, not songs that are funny because they have a funny premise. Songs that are actually constructed well, that have melody and harmonic structure and emotional logic. This matters because one of the ways South Park distinguishes itself from Family Guy over and over again is through music. Parker writes original songs for the show constantly, and many of them are startlingly good. Songs that stick with you not just because of the joke embedded in them, but because they are real songs that would work even if the joke were removed. We will come back to this. Matt Stone grew up in Littleton, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver and the town where, several years after Stone graduated from high school, a school shooting would happen that would shake the entire country, and that South Park would eventually address with characteristic directness. Stone is in many ways the steadying force in the partnership. He is sharp, analytical, more prone to stepping back and asking what something is actually saying as opposed to just whether it is funny. The dynamic between Parker and Stone is not unlike the dynamic between Lennon and McCartney, or other great creative partnerships where the two people involved have complementary instincts, and the friction between those instincts produces something neither could have made alone. What both of them share, most essentially, is an impatience with self-importance. They genuinely dislike, seem to physically recoil from, the idea of any person, group, institution, or ideology placing itself above criticism. This is not a political position in the conventional sense. It is not that they lean left or right. It is that they lean against. They are allergic to anyone who takes themselves too seriously. And this allergy has produced some of the most pointed and memorable satire in the history of American television. There's a famous quote that gets attributed to them in various forms about how the correct target for satire is anyone who is being self-righteous at the moment. It does not matter which direction the self-righteousness is coming from. The sanctimonious deserve the needle. Parker and Stone built an entire worldview around this principle, and they have applied it with remarkable consistency. To politicians on both sides, to celebrities, to religious institutions of every denomination, to activists of every stripe, the joke is always on whoever is most certain that they are right. Seth MacFarlane is a different kind of artist entirely. He is, in many ways, a classicist. His deep love for old Hollywood entertainment, for Fred Astaire movies, for Golden Age animation, for the big band sound is genuine and sincere and shows up everywhere in his work. Family Guy's theme song is a Broadway-style number, complete with a big finish and a key change. The show is full of musical cutaways that showcase MacFarlane's vocal talent and his love of classic American pop. He is a man who finds joy in craft, in the execution of a well-made entertainment product. MacFarlane has also spoken about his atheism and his progressive politics with more directness than Parker and Stone ever approached their own views. He is comfortable with the label of political comedian in a way that they are explicitly not. He knows what he believes, and Family Guy frequently reflects those beliefs. The show has a discernible political lean, targets that get targeted more gently than others, positions that are treated with more sympathy than their opposites. This is not in itself a criticism. Every artist has a worldview, and every worldview shapes the art. But it creates a different texture in the comedy. When you know, roughly speaking, what the show thinks about most subjects before an episode begins, the element of genuine surprise is reduced. You are watching the execution, not the discovery. An execution, no matter how skilled, produces a different emotional experience than discovery. Parker and Stone frequently say in interviews that they do not know where their episodes are going until very late in the process. This sounds like a making-of anecdote, but it is actually a creative philosophy. They are genuinely working something out. They are trying to figure out what they think about a subject by making an episode about it, not illustrating a conclusion they have already reached. This produces a quality in the best South Park episodes of genuine intellectual risk. The sense that something unexpected might happen, that the show might arrive somewhere that surprises even its creators. There is another dimension to both of these creative personalities that is worth sitting with in the quiet of this evening, and that is their relationship to failure. Parker and Stone have had their share of creative stumbles. There are South Park episodes that do not work, seasons that feel like the show is spinning its wheels, experiments that misfire. But their response to creative failure has consistently been to try something more ambitious, to take a bigger swing, to refuse to settle into a safe and comfortable version of what they know how to do. They made a Broadway musical, The Book of Mormon, that by any objective measure should not have worked. A show about Mormon missionaries in Uganda that managed to be simultaneously one of the funniest and most surprisingly moving pieces of American musical theater in decades. They did this in their 40s, after 20 years of making South Park, because they were still interested in doing things they did not know how to do. MacFarlane has also taken swings. He created American Dad and the Orville, pursued a career as a singer and recording artist, hosted the Academy Awards. Some of these swings have been more successful than others. But there is a sense, looking at the overall arc of Family Guy across the years, of a show that made a different choice, that decided at some point to be the thing it already knew how to be rather than to keep pushing against the edges of what that thing was. We will come back to this distinction between a show that keeps growing and a show that finds a comfortable shape and holds it, because it is one of the central arguments of this long, relaxing evening. But for now, just notice the difference in the creative souls. One pair of creators who are perpetually uncomfortable with their own success, perpetually looking for the thing that will make them feel like they are working at the edge of their ability again. And one creator who is, in many ways, more at peace, more settled in a vision that is coherent and polished and warm. Neither approach is wrong as a life philosophy, but one of them produces television that keeps surprising you 27 years in. And in the quiet logic of this late night, as your thoughts grow slower and softer, that distinction is worth holding gently in mind. Let the personalities of these artists settle into the room around you. Let the mountains of Colorado and the drawing rooms of a Rhode Island art school and the stages of Broadway and the backlots of Hollywood all exist together in the soft landscape of your imagination. We are understanding something, slowly, about why art turns out the way it does. About how the specific texture of a human being finds its way into the things they make. About how two shows that seem, on the surface, to occupy the same space, adult animated comedy, American television, sharp social observation, can be doing something fundamentally different underneath. The souls behind South Park are restless and allergic to comfort. The soul behind Family Guy is gifted and loves to please. Both of those things are true. Both of those things matter. And somewhere in the long arc of 20-plus seasons of television, the difference between them begins to show. Rest now. Let that thought drift. We have many more miles to travel through this story, and the pace is gentle, and there is no rush at all. Section 3. The heart of a Colorado mountain town. Every great television show has a place. Not just a setting, but a place, a location that functions as more than backdrop, that shapes the stories and the characters and the logic of the world in ways that go beyond the merely geographical. The Simpsons has Springfield, that perfect generic American town that is everywhere and nowhere. Seinfeld has New York City, a specific and demanding city that produces a specific and demanding kind of comedy. The Sopranos has New Jersey, all strip malls and existential dread. South Park has South Park, Colorado. And the particular nature of that place, what it is, what it feels like, what kind of people it produces, is one of the most underappreciated sources of the show's power. Let us settle into the geography for a moment. South Park is a real place, technically a high mountain park, a broad, open valley in the Rocky Mountains surrounded by peaks at an elevation somewhere around 9,000 feet. The actual town that carries the name is tiny, a few hundred people, more a community than a city in any meaningful sense. Parker has said that he spent time in this area growing up, and the landscape worked its way into his imagination in ways that he did not fully understand until later. What does a place like this do to the people who grow up in it? The altitude matters. The winters matter, long and genuine and cold in a way that coastal winters rarely are. The distance from the centers of cultural power matters. A kid growing up in South Park, Colorado is not on the cutting edge of any fashion or movement or trend. The things that seem desperately important to kids in Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, the need to be seen as cool, to align with the right brands and bands and attitudes, arrive in South Park late, diminished, slightly absurd. This produces a particular brand of American common sense, not sophistication, but something arguably more useful, a deep, ingrained skepticism toward anything that seems to be demanding too much of your attention or your loyalty. A sense that most of the dramas of the wider world are, when you get right down to it, a little overblown. That the appropriate response to crisis is rarely panic, and that most crises resolve themselves if you just wait them out with a calm demeanor and reasonable expectations. The fictional South Park of the show is built on this foundation. The town is small enough that everyone knows everyone else, which means that every new cultural phenomenon or moral panic arrives in the community and then has to be reckoned with at the level of actual human relationships. Not as an abstraction, not as a media event, but as something that affects the people you see every day at the grocery store or the bus stop. This is one of the show's great structural advantages. By filtering the absurdities of American culture through a small, tight-knit community, it forces those absurdities to become specific. They cannot remain vague and theoretical. They have to be embodied in characters we know. Think about what this means in practice. When South Park addresses celebrity culture, and it has addressed celebrity culture many times from many angles, it does not do so from the perspective of someone inside celebrity culture, or even someone on the edge of it. It does so from the perspective of a small mountain town where celebrity culture arrives as a strange signal from another planet. Interesting, but also faintly ridiculous. Something to observe and wonder at rather than aspire to or participate in. There is a distance in that perspective that creates comedy but also creates insight. Compare this to the setting of Family Guy. The fictional Rhode Island town of the Griffin family is a suburb, not the generic everywhere suburb of Springfield, but a specific kind of East Coast suburban environment, comfortable and middle class and culturally connected. Peter Griffin may not be sophisticated, but he lives in a world where sophistication is a known quantity, where the culture industries, television, film, music, celebrity, are not exotic transmissions from a distant civilization, but simply the ambient background noise of ordinary life. This is a perfectly valid setting for comedy, but it produces a different relationship to the material. When Family Guy makes a joke about a celebrity or a cultural phenomenon, it is making a joke from inside the culture, as a native, as someone who knows all the references and is fluent in all the codes. The joke is about recognition. You know this, I know this, let us share the moment of knowing it. When South Park makes a similar joke, there is often an additional layer of genuine puzzlement. What is this thing? Why does it exist? And why are we all supposed to care about it so much? That puzzlement is funnier and also more honest. The town itself, as a character, evolves over the course of the show in ways that reward the attentive viewer. In the early seasons, South Park is mostly a backdrop, a collection of stock locations, the school, the bus stop, the boys' houses, the local businesses, against which the jokes play out. But as the show deepens, the town becomes something more. Its history accumulates. Its residents develop consistent personalities and consistent failings. The adults of South Park, Randy Marsh and his wife Sharon, Mayor McDaniels, Mr. and Mrs. Stotch, Chef, Mr. Garrison, begin to feel like a community in the truest sense. Not a cast of supporting characters, but an actual community, with all the complexity and contradiction and recurring dysfunction that real communities have. Randy Marsh deserves special attention here because Randy is one of the most significant character achievements in the show's history. He begins as the generic cartoon dad, Stan's father, a geologist present when the plot requires him to be present. But over the course of the show, he is gradually, then suddenly, revealed to be something far more interesting. Randy is the distillation of a certain kind of American adult male. The man who is always absolutely certain that he has found the right answer, the right cause, the right passion, and who pursues that certainty with an enthusiasm that is completely disproportionate to his actual wisdom or self-awareness. He is vain and impulsive and occasionally cruel and fundamentally lovable, because beneath all of his certainty, there is a real person who cares about his family and is just spectacularly bad at being wise. The Randy storylines of the later seasons, particularly those involving his marijuana venture, Tegrity Farms, function as a sustained examination of a particular American archetype. The man who is willing to tell himself any story necessary to justify his own selfishness or short-sightedness, who experiences his own moral failures as narratives of heroism or rebellion. It is sharp and funny and also unexpectedly cutting, because Parker and Stone are doing something more than just mocking Randy. They are recognizing him. They understand him from the inside. And that recognition gives the comedy a warmth that pure mockery cannot achieve. The community of South Park, its geography, its scale, its specific relationship to mainstream American culture, also shapes the show's comedy in a more technical way, by providing a consistent lens. One of the structural challenges of sketch-based comedy, which is roughly what the Family Guy cutaway format produces, is that there is no lens. Each gag exists in its own space, disconnected from the others, and while disconnection has its own pleasures, it makes it very difficult to build anything. You cannot accumulate meaning through a series of disconnected images. You can only accumulate laughs, and after a while, even the best laughs feel isolated and slightly cold, like jokes told at a party where you do not know anyone else. South Park's setting provides the lens. Everything gets filtered through this specific community, these specific characters, this specific relationship between childhood innocence, or the absence of it, and adult dysfunction. The jokes accumulate. They build on each other. A reference in Season 12 means something different because of what happened in Season 8, because of what we know about these characters and this place. The show develops what might be called a grammar, a set of tonal and structural rules that the audience internalizes over time, which makes the jokes land harder because the audience knows where they are coming from. The boys themselves, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, are shaped by their environment in ways that feel true. They are the children of a small, isolated community, which means that they have a relationship with boredom that suburban or urban children might not recognize. There is nothing to do in South Park, in a certain sense. The entertainment industry and the spectacle economy feel very far away. And so the boys generate their own entertainment, which frequently involves getting into trouble, or stumbling into some larger adult drama that they have to navigate with the limited and often absurd tools that childhood provides. This is the engine of so many great South Park plots. Something arrives from the outside world, a trend, a controversy, a celebrity, a corporate interest, and it lands in this small, specific community and has to be dealt with at the human scale. The gap between the grandiosity of the external thing and the homely reality of the community is where the comedy lives. And that gap can only exist if you have a community that is genuinely specific, genuinely small, genuinely itself. Family Guy's setting, for all its visual consistency, does not provide this kind of specificity. The town exists as a collection of settings, the bar, the house, the drunken clam, the school, that are assembled as needed rather than constituting a true community. Characters like Quagmire and Cleveland exist as functions of the plot rather than as members of a genuine social world. The Griffin house feels like a stage rather than a home. None of this is fatal. The Family Guy format does not require a rich sense of place, but it means that the show cannot do a particular thing that South Park can do. It cannot make you feel watching the boys deal with some new absurdity, that you know this place well enough that the absurdity lands with the force of recognition. You cannot feel, watching Family Guy, that you have been inside the Griffin house for so long that you know its rhythms and its silences and the particular way the light falls through the kitchen window on a Saturday morning. South Park gives you that. Not in a sentimental or comfortable way, The show is never cozy, exactly, but in the deeper way of a place that has been lived in long enough to feel real. The town and its people have a history, and that history matters, and the weight of it gives the comedy a gravity that episodic disconnection cannot replicate. So let us rest here for a moment. In the imagined geography of South Park, Colorado, the mountains are visible through every window. The air is clear and cold and thin. The school bus is coming down an ordinary road in an ordinary morning, and 4 boys are waiting, and behind them, a whole town is waking up. A community of people who are flawed and funny and recognizable in the deepest possible sense, because the show that made them has spent 27 years learning their names and their histories and their particular varieties of failure. That care shows. It always shows. And it is one of the reasons, settled here in the quiet of this night, why one show feels like a place and the other feels like a stage. Let the mountains settle around you. We are going deeper. Section 4. Characters who feel like people. There is a test you can apply to fictional characters that is simple but surprisingly revealing. Close your eyes and try to predict what a character would do in a situation the show has never depicted. Not a situation that is a variation on something the show has already covered, but something genuinely new. A situation that the writers have never put that character in. If you can predict it confidently, not because you have memorized a formula, but because you genuinely feel that you know who this person is, then the character has passed the test. They have become real in the way that fictional characters can be real, which is the only way that matters. Apply this test to the characters of South Park and Family Guy, and something interesting happens. Try it with Cartman first. Eric Theodore Cartman, arguably the most precisely observed villain in the history of American animated television. Close your eyes. Imagine Cartman in some new situation. Perhaps he discovers that a kid at school has a talent he wants for himself, or he is put in charge of something and immediately begins abusing the power, or he learns that someone he dislikes is going to receive some kind of recognition or reward. What does he do? You know, don't you? You can feel the shape of it before you have even finished formulating the scenario. You can hear his voice. That particular combination of wheedling sweetness and cold menace. The way he positions his own selfishness as righteous grievance. The way he marshals his intelligence entirely in the service of his appetites. You know what Cartman would do because you know who Cartman is. Now try it with Peter Griffin. Imagine Peter in a new situation with eyes. The same kinds of scenarios. Something unfair happens to him. Something he wants is just out of reach. Someone threatens his sense of himself. What does he do? You can predict the general shape of it. Something clumsy and physical, probably. Something that escalates comically. Something involving Quagmire or Cleveland, or a cutaway to some vaguely related memory. But the prediction feels more like pattern matching than genuine knowledge. Peter's behavior is consistent without being deep. You know his type more than you know him specifically. You recognize the archetype, the bumbling, well-meaning, but catastrophically impractical American dad, without quite knowing the person inside the archetype. This is not a small distinction. Character depth. The sense that a fictional person has an interior life that exists beyond what the camera shows is the engine of all long-form dramatic and comedic storytelling. It is what makes you want to keep watching. Not just the jokes, but the people. When the jokes end, when the particular episode's plot is resolved, is there still something there? Do these people continue to exist in your imagination in some way? Or do they simply switch off the moment the credits roll? South Park's characters continue to exist. Not all of them, not always, but the core cast and the best of the recurring characters have a life beyond the screen. You think about Cartman between episodes. You wonder what he is plotting, what new self-serving narrative he is constructing in that formidable, monstrous brain of his. You wonder how Kyle is holding up, whether his particular combination of idealism and exasperation is going to survive whatever fresh absurdity is coming. You wonder what Randy has convinced himself is the right thing to do this week, and whether Sharon is going to put up with it or finally draw a line somewhere. Kyle Broflovsky is worth dwelling on, because he is one of the most interesting supporting characters in animated comedy. A character who is defined almost entirely by his conscience, and who has to watch, episode after episode, as his conscience makes his life harder rather than easier. Kyle genuinely believes in justice. He believes in fairness, in treating people correctly, in standing up for what is right, even when what is right is unpopular or uncomfortable. And because he shares a universe with Cartman, these beliefs are tested constantly, relentlessly, in ways that are sometimes genuinely painful. The Kyle and Cartman dynamic is one of the most carefully constructed relationships in the show. They are enemies in the truest sense, not simply because they clash, but because each one represents something the other cannot stand. Kyle's decency is a rebuke to Cartman's shamelessness, and Cartman's success is a rebuke to Kyle's belief that good behavior is eventually rewarded. The show has the intellectual honesty to let this tension remain unresolved, to let Cartman win sometimes in ways that feel genuinely wrong, and to let Kyle's moral victories be costly or ambiguous rather than clean and satisfying. This is what mature storytelling looks like. It does not always give the good person the win. Stan Marsh is the audience surrogate, the relatively normal kid trying to navigate an insane world. And he works because Parker voices him with a particular quality of weary sincerity. Stan is always trying to do the right thing and always discovering that the right thing is more complicated than it seemed. His relationship with his father, Randy, is one of the show's ongoing themes. The son who loves his father despite understanding, increasingly clearly, that his father is not a reliable guide to how to live. There is something genuinely bittersweet about this relationship, a quality that a pure comedy has no obligation to achieve, but that South Park keeps finding anyway. Kenny McCormick is a mystery wrapped in a parka, and the mystery is not accidental. Kenny dies in the early seasons, repeatedly, in grotesque ways, and comes back every episode without explanation. This becomes a running gag, one of the show's most famous bits. But underneath the gag, there is a character. Kenny is poor, genuinely poor, not cartoon poor, but the son of a family that is struggling in real ways, living in a smaller and dingier house than his friends, wearing a parka that obscures his face because it is the only winter coat he has. This background detail, never heavily emphasized but always present, gives Kenny a quiet dignity beneath all the violence done to his body. He is the one who is most at risk, who has the least protection from the world's cruelty, and he keeps showing up anyway. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny. These four characters have been in our lives for almost 30 years, and the best of them feel more real now than they did when we first met them, because the show has taken the time to develop them in ways that feel true to who they were established to be. That is a remarkable achievement in any creative medium. It is almost unheard of in animation. Now let us look at the Family Guy cast with the same attention. Peter Griffin is a beloved character. He is funny and physical, and his particular brand of oblivious masculinity has generated thousands of memorable moments. But ask yourself, has Peter grown? Has the show discovered new dimensions of him over its 20-plus years? Has your understanding of who he is deepened in the way that your understanding of, say, Randy Marsh has deepened? The honest answer is mostly no. Peter in Season 20 is doing roughly the same things as Peter in Season 2, making roughly the same kinds of mistakes, recovering from them in roughly the same ways. His friendship with Quagmire and Cleveland follows the same beats it always has. His marriage to Lois oscillates between affectionate and contentious in the same rhythm it always has. His relationship with Meg, the family punching bag, the character defined entirely by being the target of her family's casual cruelty, has not evolved into something more complex. It has simply continued. Stewie Griffin is the character most fans point to when they want to argue that Family Guy has depth. And they have a point. Stewie in the early seasons, the diabolical infant with the vague British accent and the elaborate schemes for world domination and matricide, is a genuinely original creation. A wonderful joke about the barely contained murderousness lurking beneath the surface of infantile helplessness. The joke is brilliant in its original form. But what happened to Stewie over the course of the show is instructive. As the show's creators became uncertain about whether the audience took the world domination aspect seriously, as it became clear that Stewie could not actually succeed in any of his schemes without fundamentally breaking the show's format, they began to soften him. The diabolical edge was replaced by a more conventional personality. Stewie became gay-coded, which opened new comedy avenues, but also diffused the original danger. He became more of a vehicle for McFarlane's comedic voice, sharp and quick and referential, and less of a character with a specific inner life of his own. Brian Griffin is the character who perhaps best illustrates the Family Guy approach to depth versus the South Park approach. Brian is a dog who is also a failed novelist and an intellectual, which is clearly meant to be a joke. The pompous aspirations of the failed artist rendered absurd by the fact that they are housed in a dog's body. But the show is not always sure whether Brian's pretensions are meant to be genuinely ridiculous, or just endearingly misguided. He oscillates between being the butt of the joke and being the show's straight man, its voice of reason. This oscillation is not the same as complexity. Complex characters can surprise you. Brian mostly just makes you uncertain whether the show is laughing at him or with him. Meg Griffin, meanwhile, is a missed opportunity of profound proportions. Here is a character defined by being unloved, ignored, and humiliated. A teenager who cannot seem to catch a break from anyone, including her own family. The comedic premise is that her suffering is treated as normal, even amusing. And for several seasons, the show simply plays this premise without examining it. When the show does occasionally turn its attention to Meg more seriously, exploring what it would mean to be this person, the results are more interesting. There have been Meg episodes that hint at a genuinely complex and wounded inner life. But these moments are rare and do not change the character's fundamental function in the show, which is to be the recipient of abuse. In South Park, the character who might map onto Meg's function, the one who exists in relationship to Cartman, the way Meg exists in relationship to everyone else, is Butters Stotch. And what the show has done with Butters is one of its greatest achievements. Butters starts as a minor character, a gentle, credulous boy who appears in the background and occasionally gets roped into Cartman's schemes by virtue of his own trusting nature. But over the years, Butters has been developed into something extraordinary. A genuinely innocent person in a world that does not quite know what to do with genuine innocence. Butters is not stupid. He is not naive in the conventional sense. He simply operates from a position of fundamental goodwill, a belief that most things will work out and that most people are basically decent. And this belief gets him into trouble repeatedly and spectacularly. But the show indeed, crucially, does not simply punish him for this belief. It shows us that his innocence, however often exploited, is also a form of strength. Butters can absorb more punishment and remain more essentially himself than almost any other character on the show. He bends under the weight of Cartman's cruelty and the world's indifference, but he does not break. He keeps showing up, optimistic and slightly confused, and there is something in that persistence that is quietly moving. The contrast between how South Park and Family Guy treat their most vulnerable characters tells you something essential about the creative philosophies behind each show. South Park uses vulnerability to reveal character, both the character being mistreated and the character doing the mistreating. Family Guy uses vulnerability as a punchline. Neither approach is without precedent in comedy, but one of them is more interesting to watch for 27 years. Character is destiny in storytelling. The people a show gives, you determine what kinds of stories can be told, what kinds of meaning can be made, what kind of relationship you develop with the show over the years. South Park has given us characters complex enough to carry the weight of 27 seasons of ambitious storytelling. They have grown and changed and revealed new dimensions of themselves. They have surprised us. They have made us feel things we did not expect to feel about animated children on a cheap-looking mountain backdrop. Family Guy has given us a cast of characters who are consistently funny and consistently comfortable to spend time with, who deliver reliable entertainment and the pleasure of recognition. That is not nothing. That is genuinely something. But it is a different kind of something. And in the long arithmetic of 20 years of television, the difference compounds. Rest here with these characters for a moment. Think about which ones you know the way you know people you have met, and which ones you know the way you know a type, a category, a familiar shape. The distinction lives somewhere in the body, somewhere below the level of conscious analysis, in the place where genuine stories settle and stay. Section 5. The courage to say anything. There's a scene in a South Park episode from 2006, part of a two-part episode called Cartoon Wars. That is one of the most precise and funny pieces of television criticism ever made. In this scene, the boys are arguing about Family Guy, and one of them explains how the show's jokes are generated. Cut to a manatee tank. Inside the tank, manatees push balls through a tube, and the balls pop out in combinations, and each combination generates a cutaway gag. The joke is that Family Guy's comedy is random, associative, purely combinatorial. That it does not come from a genuine creative vision, but from an algorithm of references mashed together by large aquatic mammals. This scene did not make the Family Guy people happy. McFarlane was publicly displeased. Parker and Stone knew exactly what they were doing. What makes the scene remarkable is not just its edge, though it has real edge, but its accuracy. It is making a real argument about the nature of comedy, disguised as a gag about manatees. The argument is this: jokes that come from a coherent vision of the world hit differently than jokes that come from the accumulation of references. A punchline that earns its laugh by revealing something true about human nature or society is doing something fundamentally different from a punchline that earns its laugh by reminding you that a thing exists. South Park built its reputation on the first kind of joke, and the audacity required to make that kind of joke, to say something true and uncomfortable rather than something recognizable and safe, is one of the show's defining qualities. Let us talk about courage in comedy, because it is not a quality that gets enough attention. We talk about timing and construction and premise and character, but courage, the willingness to make a joke that might alienate a significant portion of your audience, that might generate real controversy, that might be wrong in some cases and nevertheless must be attempted, because the alternative is a kind of creative cowardice, is the quality that separates the merely good from the genuinely significant. South Park has courage in abundance, not always well-directed courage. There are South Park episodes that cross lines in ways that feel gratuitous rather than purposeful, that mistake shock for insight. But the baseline willingness to go somewhere uncomfortable is constant, and it has produced some of the most important pieces of comedy television ever made. Consider the episode Trapped in the Closet from Season 9, which takes direct aim at Scientology, not a vague, softened version of Scientology, but the actual institution, including a frank description of the core theological beliefs that the organization generally keeps confidential, and including celebrity adherents depicted with their names displayed on screen in large text. This was not a safe episode to make. Scientology is known for pursuing legal action aggressively, and the power of its celebrity members was, in 2005, a real consideration. Parker and Stone made the episode anyway. They made it because the joke required it, and because the truth required it, and because a show that claims to go after everyone has to actually go after everyone. Isaac Hayes, who voiced the character of Chef and was himself a Scientologist, left the show in response to this episode. Parker and Stone's response to his departure was characteristically unsentimental. They acknowledged his right to leave and made a final Chef episode that, to put it gently, did not treat the character gently. The message was clear. The show is not going to soften its position based on the personal feelings of people connected to it. Consider the episodes addressing the Prophet Muhammad cartoon controversy of 2010, in which South Park tried to include an image of the Prophet Muhammad as part of a plot that was explicitly about the unwillingness of television networks and the wider media establishment to treat Islam the same way they treated other religions. Comedy Central actually censored the episode, bleeped out a significant portion of the audio and obscured content, which inadvertently proved the exact point the episode was trying to make about media double standards. Parker and Stone were publicly furious about the censorship. They had made the episode because they believed it needed to exist, and their own network had pulled its teeth. Consider, on a somewhat quieter note, the multiple episodes addressing childhood obesity, the opioid crisis, climate change activism, the psychology of mass shootings, and other subjects that most comedy writers would avoid precisely because the potential for getting it wrong is so high. South Park does not always get these right, but the show keeps trying, keeps engaging with the most uncomfortable material it can find. Because the alternative, the comfortable non-engagement of a comedy that sticks to safe targets, is not acceptable to the people making it. What does courage look like in practice at the joke level? It looks like the willingness to make the audience feel genuinely uncomfortable rather than pleasurably transgressive. There is a difference. Transgressive comedy creates the thrill of crossing a line. You feel naughty. You feel like you are part of a group that is bold enough to say the unsayable. This is pleasurable, and Family Guy is very good at providing this pleasure. The show has plenty of material that feels edgy and bold in this way. The mag abuse jokes, some of the more politically charged, the casual, gleeful offensiveness that is part of the show's identity. But genuinely courageous comedy makes you laugh, and then makes you feel something more complicated. Recognition, discomfort, the slightly vertiginous sensation of having seen something true that you would have preferred not to see. It does not let you off the hook. It does not provide the comfort of belonging to the in-group that gets the joke. It makes the joke land somewhere in your gut and stay there. The Scott Tenorman Must Die episode from Season 5 is perhaps the cleanest example of this quality in South Park. To describe its conclusion without giving it away is difficult, but let us say that it involves Cartman engineering the most devastating act of revenge in the show's history. That the revenge is so extreme and so completely successful that it produces in the viewer something that is not quite laughter, more like awe at the scope of it, and horror at the fact that your awe is present at all. The episode is funny. It is also disturbing, and the disturbance and the humor are inseparable. Take one away, and you lose the other. Parker and Stone understood something about Cartman that enabled this episode. That true sociopathy is funny as a comedy premise, but becomes genuinely chilling when pushed to its logical conclusion. And that the chilling effect does not cancel the comedy, but deepens it into something closer to genuine art. You are laughing at something that should not be laughed at, and you know it. And the knowledge is part of the experience. Family Guy has attempted this kind of comedy on occasion. There are Family Guy episodes that aim at something darker and more complicated than the standard cutaway rhythm. but the show's format works against it. The cutaway gag structure is fundamentally non-cumulative. Each joke starts from zero, builds to a punchline, and resets. You cannot build dread in a format that resets after every beat. You cannot create the gathering sense of something going very wrong, which is the essential ingredient of the darkest comedy, when the rhythm of the show keeps cutting away to something unrelated. South Park can build. It can establish a premise and follow it with complete commitment through an entire episode, letting the logic of the premise compound until it arrives somewhere that surprises and unsettles. The willingness to commit to a premise, to follow it wherever it genuinely leads, is itself a form of courage. Because you do not know, when you start following a premise honestly, whether it will lead somewhere good or somewhere catastrophic. There's another dimension of courage worth discussing: the courage of self-criticism. South Park has, on multiple occasions, turned its satirical lens on itself, on its creators, on the mechanisms by which it achieves its effects. The show has made fun of its own fans. It has made fun of the idea of a show like South Park, the self-congratulatory edginess of a comedy that gets attention by saying things no one else will say. There is an episode that is explicitly about whether offensive comedy is genuinely brave or whether it is its own form of comfort, a way of feeling superior without taking any real risk. Not many shows have the intellectual honesty to ask that question about themselves. Family Guy has occasionally been self-referential, and there's a whole season of the show that deals with the experience of being canceled and revived. But the self-reference tends toward the celebratory rather than the critical. The show does not often seem to doubt itself in ways that produce new understanding. Self-doubt, in the South Park tradition, is a creative tool. Self-celebration, in the Family Guy tradition, is a comfort. Courage is not the most glamorous quality in comedy. It does not produce the consistent laugh-per-minute rate that a tightly constructed joke machine produces. It sometimes produces episodes that are interesting more than they are funny, that are brave more than they are pleasant to watch. But courage is also what makes a comedy worth defending, what makes it worth remembering, what makes it matter beyond the immediate pleasure of the laugh. South Park matters in this way. It has used its platform, the astonishing, unlikely platform of a crudely animated cartoon about children in a small Colorado mountain town, to say things that needed to be said, to ask questions that needed to be asked, to create discomfort in audiences that had grown comfortable. It has done this imperfectly. It has gotten things wrong. It has overstepped in ways that produced genuine harm as well as genuine insight. But the overall balance sheet is one of remarkable creative courage, sustained over nearly 3 decades. That courage is one of the deepest reasons why South Park is the better show. Not because courage is inherently more valuable than craft or entertainment, but because courage applied to storytelling over the long term produces something that craft and entertainment alone cannot produce: a show that still has something to say. Let that settle. Let the thought of creative courage drift through the quiet of this room. Think about the things you love that required someone to be brave enough to make them. Think about the comedy that has ever made you feel genuinely uncomfortable and then grateful for the discomfort. That is what we are talking about. That is the essential thing. Rest now. There is more coming. Section 6. Storytelling that earns its laughs. We have been talking in this long and gentle evening about characters and places and courage. Now let us slow down even further and talk about something more fundamental: the craft of telling a story. Every television episode, no matter how seemingly casual or throwaway, is a piece of storytelling. Something is established, something develops, something resolves, or fails to resolve, which is itself a kind of resolution. The question is not whether a show tells stories, but how it tells them, and what choices it makes in the telling. South Park and Family Guy have made very different choices. Family Guy's primary unit of comedy is the cutaway gag. You know the format intimately if you have watched more than 10 minutes of the show. A character says something, usually a phrase that opens the door to a comparison or a reference, and the show cuts away from the main narrative to a brief scene, often unrelated to the plot, often involving familiar cultural references, often featuring Peter or another Griffin family member in a context, disconnected from the episode's storyline. The scene plays out, the joke lands or does not, and we cut back to the main story. At its best, this format produces jokes of genuine brilliance. Some of the funniest individual moments in animation history are Family Guy cutaway gags, perfectly timed, perfectly performed, arriving from an unexpected angle and landing with a specificity that makes you understand exactly why this joke needed to be made. McFarlane and his writers are extraordinarily good at this format, and dismissing it entirely would be both unfair and inaccurate. But the format has structural consequences that compound over time. The first consequence is that the main narrative of a Family Guy episode is often not doing much. It cannot afford to do much because the episode needs to make room for cutaway gags, and the more important the narrative becomes, the more the cutaways interrupt and deflate it. So the main story tends to be a relatively simple premise. Peter gets a job, Stewie wants something, Meg tries to have a social life that exists primarily as an armature for hanging jokes, rather than as a story worth caring about in its own right. This is a perfectly defensible creative choice for a half-hour comedy, but it means that the show is not developing the muscles that enable long-form storytelling. It is very good at the sprint, the perfectly timed individual gag, but it has not learned to run distance. And over the course of 20-plus seasons, the absence of those muscles becomes more and more apparent. South Park, particularly from around season 14 or 15 onward, made a deliberate choice to develop those muscles. The show began telling multi-episode arcs, stories that started in one episode and continued through 2 or 3 or 4 more, that required the audience to remember what had happened before, that built toward conclusions that only made sense in the context of everything that had come before them. The Black Friday trilogy, the Hobbit arc, the serialization arc that ran through an entire season, the PC principal storyline that played out across multiple seasons. These extended narratives are not just technically impressive, they are the vehicle for some of the show's most ambitious comedy. What South Park discovered in developing these long-form muscles is that comedy and drama are not opposites. They are two modes of engaging with human truth, and the most interesting storytelling uses them together. A joke can be the culmination of a dramatic arc in a way that is more emotionally satisfying than any dramatic resolution alone. You have seen this in other contexts, in the best moments of shows like Frasier or The Office, where a laugh and a genuine feeling are happening simultaneously, where the comedy does not undercut the emotion, but deepens it. South Park has achieved this synthesis repeatedly and memorably. There are moments in the show, Randy's realizations, Stan's confrontations with his own growing cynicism, Kyle's persistent attempts to believe in a just universe, where the comedy and the genuine feeling are inseparable, where one without the other would be a lesser thing. This is the goal of the best storytelling. It is what happens when a show has taken the time to build real characters and follow them through real stakes. The A-plot and B-plot structure that South Park employs in most episodes is also worth examining because it is used far more skillfully than you might expect from a show that looks as economical as South Park does visually. In a typical South Park episode, there is a main plot, usually the boys dealing with some aspect of current events or culture, and a secondary plot, usually involving Randy or the adult community of South Park. The two plots are developed in parallel and brought together in the third act, and the bringing together almost always reveals something, a connection between the two storylines that illuminates both of them in a new way. This structure requires a level of craft that is genuinely impressive. You are essentially writing two short stories simultaneously and then finding the place where they connect, and the connection cannot be arbitrary. It has to feel inevitable in retrospect, the way a good mystery solution feels inevitable. Parker and Stone manage this regularly in a production schedule that gives them less time than almost any other show on television. We will talk about that schedule in detail in the next section. But for now, just notice that the craft is present in the structure of the stories themselves, not just in the individual jokes. There is also something to be said about the way South Park handles the relationship between the absurd and the specific. The show's premises are often wildly, magnificently absurd. The boys encounter some current cultural phenomenon or political controversy, and it escalates to a scope that involves global stakes, alien civilizations, the literal intervention of God or Satan, or both. But the emotional core of the episode is always specific and human. The absurdity is not an escape from feeling. It is a delivery mechanism for feeling, a way of making the emotional content hit harder by approaching it from an unexpected angle. Think about the Casa Bonita episode. The premise is pure absurdity. Cartman fakes a friend's death, convinces Butters that a meteor is about to destroy civilization, locks him in a bomb shelter, tells the world he has died, so that Cartman can take the friend's spot on a trip to Casa Bonita, a Mexican restaurant chain that Cartman loves more than essentially any other thing on Earth. The scheme is monstrous and elaborate. But the episode works not because of the monstrousness alone, but because of the genuine, almost tender quality of Cartman's love for Casa Bonita. An emotion so pure and overwhelming that it bypasses his already minimal ethical considerations entirely. And because of Butters emerging from his bomb shelter weeks later, blinking in the sunlight, discovering that civilization has not ended, that he has been profoundly betrayed by someone he trusted, and responding to this betrayal with his characteristic bewildered sadness. There is something poignant there inside the comedy. The episode earns it. Family Guy cannot do the Casa Bonita episode. Not because the premise is beyond its range. Family Guy has premises of comparable absurdity, but because the show has not done the work with its characters that would make the emotional content possible. If Peter Griffin did something equivalent to what Cartman does in that episode, it would be a gag about Peter being foolish and selfish. It would not be a revelation about the nature of Cartman's psychology, which is what the episode ultimately is. The difference is the depth of the character underneath the joke, the comedy of earned feeling. Jokes that work because they come from real characters in real situations with genuine stakes is one of the hardest things to sustain in a long-running series. It requires a show to keep caring about its characters even as they become familiar, to keep finding new things in them rather than simply deploying their established traits in new situations. South Park has done this. Not perfectly, not in every episode, but consistently enough that the show at 27 years old can still surprise you with the quality and depth of its storytelling. That is an extraordinary achievement. And it is an achievement that begins with the choice of how to tell stories, with the decision to commit to narrative, to characters, to the building of something rather than the assembly of something. It is the difference between a story and a mechanism for delivering jokes. Both can be pleasurable, but only one can be great. Let this thought rest alongside the others we have been gathering tonight. Let the image of good storytelling, a thing built carefully over time with characters who matter and premises that earn their conclusions, settle into the warm, quiet space where your attention is drifting. You have heard stories all your life. You know what a good one feels like. You know the difference between a laugh and a resonance. And tonight, in this late hour, the resonance is what we are after. Section 7. The 6-Day Miracle. There is a documentary about South Park made in 2011 called 6 Days to Air. If you have never seen it and you have any interest at all in how creative work gets made under pressure, it is one of the most fascinating pieces of filmmaking about the television industry ever produced. The title tells you the central fact: South Park is written, animated, voiced, scored, and delivered to the network in approximately 6 days. 1 week. From nothing to a finished episode that will be broadcast to millions of people in 6 days. Let that settle for a moment, because it is genuinely extraordinary. Most animated television shows operate on a production timeline of 6 to 9 months per episode. The Simpsons, which has been running since 1989 and is produced by a large studio with enormous resources, takes roughly 6 months to produce each episode. Family Guy operates on a similar timeline. Scripts are written, revised again, recorded, sent to animation studios overseas, returned, reviewed, adjusted, and eventually broadcast, and the whole process from concept to screen takes somewhere between 6 and 9 months. South Park does this in 6 days. Every single episode, every single season for 27 years. The logistics of this are staggering. Parker and Stone write the script, or more accurately, they develop the concept together. Parker usually doing most of the writing while Stone develops the story in the first 2 days. Animation begins before the script is finished, which means the animators are working on early scenes while the later scenes are still being written. Recording happens in the middle of the process, not at the beginning. The music, which Parker composes himself, is written in the final days. The whole operation runs in parallel rather than in sequence, which is the only way to make the timeline work. And it means that decisions made in the final day can require changes to work done in the first day, which is as close to controlled chaos as a professional production gets. Why do they do this? I do. The obvious practical answer is that the 6-day timeline allows the show to respond to current events in a way that no other television show can. An episode of South Park can address something that happened this week, a news story, a cultural moment, a political development, with a freshness and immediacy that a show produced on a conventional timeline simply cannot match. When something happens in the world on a Monday, South Park can have an episode about it on air by Wednesday. This is genuinely unprecedented in the history of scripted television. But the deeper reason, the one that Parker and Stone have talked about over the years, is that the pressure produces something that a more comfortable timeline does not. When you have 6 days, you cannot second-guess yourself. You cannot write a scene and then spend 3 weeks wondering if it is the right scene. You cannot revise away the impulse that created the episode in the first place, smoothing out the rough edges until what remains is competent but inert. You have to commit. You have to trust your instincts. You have to keep moving. This produces a quality in the finished episodes that is distinct and recognizable, a sense of urgency, of genuine heat, of someone working at the edge of their ability and not quite sure whether they will make it. The best South Park episodes feel like they are about to fly apart. They are held together by the intensity of the creative vision and not much else, and that quality of barely contained energy is part of what makes them so alive. There is a long-running documentary series that followed Parker and Stone across multiple seasons, giving viewers a look at the writing process in real time. What you see in those behind-the-scenes glimpses is simultaneously inspiring and exhausting. Parker pacing. Parker and Stone at a conference table at midnight, picking apart a premise that is not working, trying to find the angle that will make it work. The exhaustion is genuine. The creative desperation is genuine. And the fact that they keep going, season after season, week after week, submitting themselves to this level of sustained pressure, tells you something about what the show means to them. Compare this to the Family Guy production process, which is, by all accounts, a more comfortable operation. Scripts go through multiple drafts and multiple rounds of table reads. Episodes are recorded, sent to animation studios in Korea, returned months later, reviewed, and revised before broadcast. The process is professional and thorough, and it produces episodes with a high level of technical polish. The animation is consistent, the timing is careful, the jokes are workshopped until they land as cleanly as possible. But something gets lost in all that workshopping. The edge, the urgency, the quality of genuine creative risk that comes from working without a safety net. When you have 6 months to produce an episode, you have time to think too hard about whether the joke is going to land. You have time to let committee decisions smooth out the points. You have time to replace something daring with something reliable. These are not conscious choices necessarily. They are the natural result of having time. The 6-day production model also has a philosophical implication that goes beyond the practical. It reflects something about how Parker and Stone understand the relationship between art and current reality. For them, the job of comedy, certainly the job of South Park, is not to produce a timeless artifact, but to engage with the living world as it exists right now. The show is a running commentary on the human circus as it performs each week, not a meditation on eternal themes delivered from a safe distance. This means that South Park can fail in spectacular ways. An episode built around a news story that turns out to be more complicated than it first appeared, or a cultural moment that the show reads incorrectly, lands with a kind of visible wrongness that a more carefully produced show would never risk. There are South Park episodes that are embarrassing in retrospect, that got something badly wrong, that the show itself has acknowledged as failures. This vulnerability is real, but it is the cost of being genuinely present in the world rather than hovering safely above it. Family Guy, produced on a longer timeline, simply cannot make this kind of mistake. And it cannot make this kind of miracle either. Cannot produce the episode that arrives on Wednesday night and makes everyone feel that someone understands exactly what happened in the world this week. That someone has looked at the same news stories and had the same bewildered reactions and found the joke inside the bewilderment. South Park can do that. It does it regularly, imperfectly, brilliantly, in 6 days. The Book of Mormon is worth mentioning in this context too, because it is an extension of the same creative philosophy applied to a different medium. Parker and Stone spent years developing the musical, but the process of developing it was characterized by the same willingness to keep working until the last possible moment, to keep revising, to keep trusting instinct over comfort. The result is a piece of musical theater that feels genuinely alive, that has the quality of something that could have gone wrong but did not, and whose rightness is therefore more thrilling than the rightness of something that was never in any danger. The production miracle of South Park is not just a scheduling curiosity. It is a window into the creative soul of the show. The restlessness, the urgency, the refusal to be comfortable, the insistence on engaging with the world as it actually is rather than the world as it existed 6 months ago when someone first pitched a concept in a writer's room. It is one of the reasons the show feels more alive than most television. It is literally being made alive in real time under conditions that should not work and yet do, week after week, season after season, for 27 years. Think about that as you rest here in the quiet. Somewhere in the mountains, metaphorically speaking, there are 2 men who are probably awake right now, working on something, arguing about whether it is going to work, finding the angle that will make it work. And in 6 days, it will exist in the world, imperfect and urgent and alive. That is a remarkable thing. Hold it gently. Section 8. Equal opportunity. Discomfort. There's a criticism that gets leveled at South Park fairly often, particularly by people who encounter the show for the first time and find themselves on the receiving end of a joke that targets something they care about. The criticism goes like this. The show is not actually brave because genuine bravery would mean only targeting the powerful, only punching up, and South Park frequently punches sideways and downward. It mocks not just the institutions and ideologies that deserve mockery, but also the communities and individuals who are already marginalized or vulnerable. This, the argument goes, is not courage. It is the ancient comedy tradition of laughing at people who cannot defend themselves, dressed up in the language of equal opportunity offense. This is a criticism worth taking seriously. It is not entirely wrong. There are South Park episodes that have made genuinely bad choices about who to target and how, that have caused real harm rather than productive discomfort, that have used the shield of equal opportunity satire to do something that is actually more like casual cruelty. The show has a long and complicated history with its treatment of gay characters, with racial humor, with jokes about disability. Not every South Park episode has been wise in how it has deployed its willingness to say anything. But the core principle, that satire worthy of the name, must be willing to target any ideology, any community, any institution, regardless of where that target falls on the conventional political spectrum, is not just defensible, it is essential. And South Park has applied it with a more genuine consistency than almost any other comedy show of its era. Here is the test. Think about the political and cultural comedy landscape of the past decade. Think about late-night television, about sketch comedy saabi shows, about satirical news programs. Now ask yourself, in the past 5 years, which of those programs has made a joke that made their own core audience genuinely uncomfortable? Not a joke about the other side. Not a joke that confirmed the audience's existing prejudices while wrapping them in the pleasurable form of humor, but a joke that challenged the audience itself, that said something unflattering about the people in the seats? The answer for most of those programs is rarely. Modern comedy has become tribal in a way that would have surprised the great satirists of earlier generations. The audience for most political comedy already agrees with the comedian before the joke is made. The joke confirms agreement. It creates a pleasurable in-group feeling, the satisfaction of having your views expressed entertainingly. This is not satire. It is entertainment disguised as satire, which is a significantly less valuable thing. South Park has not been tribal in this way. The show has, over its 27 years, made genuinely uncomfortable jokes about environmentalism, about progressive activism, about atheism, about gender politics, about cancel culture from multiple angles, about the political left in ways that have made the show's progressive fans wince. It has made equally uncomfortable jokes about conservative Christianity, about nationalism, about corporate power, about the political right. The target is never the ideology per se, but always the self-righteousness that attaches to the ideology. The human tendency to be absolutely certain that you are correct, and to be contemptuous of everyone who disagrees. The episode about climate change activism, Man, Bear, Pig, is instructive here. The episode aired in 2006 when Al Gore was promoting his documentary An Inconvenient Truth, and it made fun of Gore's intensity and self-importance so effectively that many viewers, particularly conservative ones, took it as a dismissal of climate change itself. Then, in 2018, South Park aired a sequel that explicitly acknowledged that Man, Bear, Pig was real, that climate change was actually happening, and made the joke this time about the people who had dismissed the warnings when there was still time to act. The show had been making fun of the messenger in 2006, not the message, and 12 years later, it came back to say so. This is sophisticated comedy. It is comedy that is willing to embarrass itself in the short term in order to say something more complete in the long term. Very few television shows have the patience or the intellectual honesty to pull this off. The PC Principal storyline, which ran across multiple seasons starting in season 19, is another example of this sophistication in action. The storyline introduced a new principal at South Park Elementary, who embodies a particular brand of contemporary progressive politics. The kind of politics that is enforced through social pressure and public shame rather than through persuasion or genuine moral reasoning. PC Principal is not a villain in the conventional sense. He is genuinely motivated by good values. He wants to protect vulnerable people from harm, but his methods are coercive and his self-righteousness is immense, and the show traces, across multiple seasons, the ways in which well-intentioned moral policing can produce environments of fear and conformity that undermine the very values it claims to protect. What makes the storyline remarkable is that it does not simply mock PC Principal and leave it there. The show explores the conditions that produced him, the genuine harms that progressive politics is responding to, the real vulnerability of communities that have been ignored or damaged by the older social order. PC Principal is wrong in his methods, but the show is careful to show that he is not wrong about everything, and that the people who oppose him are not therefore right about everything either. This is the equal opportunity discomfort principle at its most mature. No one gets to feel comfortable. No one gets to be the audience's surrogate who is always correct and always vindicated. Everyone is implicated, including the audience, including, sometimes, the show itself. Family Guy does not work this way. Family Guy has a discernible political lean. It leans left, broadly speaking, with a particular attachment to secular liberalism and a skepticism toward organized religion that runs through much of its comedy. There is nothing wrong with this as a personal or artistic position, but it means that the show's political and social comedy tends to comfort the audience that already agrees with it, rather than challenging anyone. The jokes about conservative politicians tend to confirm the views of the liberal viewers who are the show's primary audience. The jokes about religion tend to generate knowing laughs from the secular viewers who form the core demographic. The comedy confirms rather than disrupts, and as a result, it ages badly. What felt brave in 2004 can feel like preaching to the converted in 2020 then. There is a reason South Park episodes from 20 years ago often feel more current than Family Guy episodes from 20 years ago. The Family Guy episodes are dated because they were responding to a specific political and cultural moment in a way that assumed certain things were permanent, that certain targets were always fair game, that certain views were obviously correct, that certain cultural battles were settled. South Park's best episodes are not dated in the same way, because they were responding not to specific political positions, but to the eternal human quality that produces political positions, the certainty that you are right. Certainty is always with us. The targets of certainty change, but the certainty itself is perennial. A show that targets certainty can be watched in any decade and find something to say. A show that targets specific positions can only be watched in the decade those positions were current. This is not a simple thing to do. Targeting certainty rather than positions requires a kind of intellectual flexibility that is genuinely uncomfortable to maintain. It means being willing to criticize something you basically agree with, in the same breath that you criticize something you basically oppose. It means never getting to be entirely on the right side of your own joke. It means being, in some important sense, alone. Not part of any tribe, not reliably safe for any audience, perpetually at risk of alienating everyone simultaneously. Parker and Stone have accepted this condition. They have talked about it in interviews, the discomfort of being politically homeless, of not having a side that will always have your back. They describe it as uncomfortable and occasionally lonely, but they also describe it as creatively essential, as the only position from which genuinely honest comedy can be made. That honesty, that willingness to be uncomfortable yourself in a pursuit of comedy that makes everyone uncomfortable, is one of the things that makes South Park worth 27 years of attention. It is comedy that does not let anyone off the hook. And in an entertainment landscape where being let off the hook is the primary product being sold, that is a genuinely distinctive and genuinely valuable thing. Let the equal discomfort settle around you in the quiet. Think about the comedy you have loved most in your life and whether it challenged you or confirmed you. Think about what it feels like when a joke lands somewhere genuinely unexpected, somewhere that required the comedian to take a risk, to not know whether the audience would come along. That feeling is what South Park is after. Not every episode finds it, but the pursuit never stops. Rest. We are going deeper still. Section 9. Growth, Change, and Long Arcs. One of the most profound things a long-running television show can do is change. Not change in the sense of declining, not the slow entropy of a show running out of ideas and filling time with lesser versions of its former self, but genuine growth. The kind of change that happens to living things, that reveals new capacities while honoring the essential nature that was always there. Very few shows manage this. The institutional pressures of commercial television work against genuine change. Audiences like what they know. Advertisers like predictable demographics. Networks like consistency. The default setting of the entertainment industry is repetition. Find what works and repeat it until it stops working, and then keep repeating it slightly past that point because the alternative is uncertainty, and uncertainty is expensive. Against this institutional gravity, South Park has managed to genuinely grow. Not always gracefully. Not without stumbles and wrong turns and seasons that felt like the show was treading water. But the trajectory, looking at it from the distance of 27 seasons, is one of a real creative development. A show that is doing fundamentally different things in season 25 than it was doing in season 5. Not because it has abandoned what it is, but because it has discovered new depths in what it is. Let us trace that growth. The early South Park, seasons 1 through about 6 or 7, is primarily episodic and primarily comedic in a fairly direct sense. Each episode is its own self-contained universe. Characters do not carry memories from one episode to the next in any meaningful way. The boys can die and come back, can learn lessons and forget them, can occupy contradictory personality positions in adjacent episodes without any acknowledgement of the contradiction. This is the standard grammar of episodic animated comedy, the same grammar that The Simpsons operates in and that Family Guy has always operated in. Episodes end and reset. There is no accumulation. This early South Park is very funny and often very sharp, but it is not doing something that most animated comedies cannot do. It is using its format, the freedom of animation, the flexibility of the cartoon medium, to say edgier things and go to weirder places than a live-action show could. But the underlying structure is the same structure that Saturday morning cartoons have always used. It is episodic. It resets. Then something begins to change gradually around season 8 or 9. The show starts showing signs of wanting to accumulate. Characters start carrying emotional residue from previous episodes. Choices made earlier in a season start having consequences later. The relationship between Cartman and Kyle, always present but always reset at the end of each episode, starts developing a genuine history. A set of specific grievances and specific wounds that do not disappear when the credits roll. The relationship between Randy and Sharon starts to feel like a marriage with actual history rather than a comedic prop. By seasons 14 and 15, something has crystallized. South Park begins explicitly serializing stories, telling narratives that span multiple episodes, that build on each other, that require the audience to hold information in memory from one week to the next. The Black Friday trilogy in season 17, which parodies both Game of Thrones and the phenomenon of retail violence during holiday shopping, is 3 episodes long and requires all 3 to reach its conclusion. The story has an actual arc, genuine stakes within its satirical frame, and a resolution that lands harder because the preceding episodes have built toward it. Season 19, the Mr. Garrison arc, takes this further still. The entire season is structured as a continuous narrative, not 3 episodes, but an entire season's worth of interconnected storytelling, all building toward a satirical portrait of a political moment that was, in 2015, just beginning to become visible. The show is telling a story about a grotesque political candidate with no genuine qualifications who nevertheless gained enormous popular support through the force of his willingness to say whatever his audience wanted to hear. And it told this story months before that description became unmistakably topical in ways that no one fully anticipated. This is growth. This is a show that has learned something new about what it can do. Something that the version of itself from 10 years earlier was not capable of. And is using that new capacity to engage with the world in a more ambitious and more complete way. Compare this to the arc of Family Guy. Family Guy in Season 22 is doing essentially the same things as Family Guy in Season 4. The format has not evolved. The cutaway structure has not developed new capacities. The characters have not accumulated history in ways that change how you watch their current stories. The show is doing what it has always done, with varying levels of success, on a treadmill that goes nowhere new. This is not a condemnation. A treadmill has value. It keeps you moving. It maintains something. But it is not going anywhere. And for a show that has been running for 25 years, going nowhere is its own kind of statement about creative ambition. The emotional growth of South Park's characters is also worth dwelling on, because it is one of the things that most surprises viewers who associate the show with crass shock comedy and nothing more. Stan Marsh, the nominal audience surrogate, has an episode in the middle seasons, You're Getting Old, in Season 15. That is genuinely one of the most moving pieces of television the show has ever produced. In this episode, Stan turns 10 years old and suddenly finds himself unable to enjoy anything. Everything sounds like defecation sounds. Every song, every movie, every piece of entertainment that everyone around him loves sounds to him like someone relieving themselves. The episode is partly a joke about cynicism and artistic fatigue, but it is also and this is the remarkable part, a genuine portrait of depression and the way it closes down the capacity for pleasure. The episode ends without resolution. Stan's condition does not get better in the final act. His parents are separating. His world is changing in ways he cannot control. And he sits in his room listening to something he used to love and hearing only the sounds of a waste. It is sad. Not in the way that a melodrama is sad, not with swelling music and close-ups on tearful faces, but in the quiet, specific way of something that has gotten a real thing true. The show in that moment is doing something that comedy usually has neither the courage nor the craft to attempt. Family Guy has made moves toward this kind of emotional depth occasionally. The episode where Brian dies, and in the subsequent reversal, was presented as an emotionally significant moment, and for a brief time the grief felt real. But the reversal, coming just 2 episodes later, retroactively drained the episode of whatever genuine weight it had briefly carried. The show could not commit to the consequence. It could not let the sadness be real and permanent, because real and permanent changes do not fit the Family Guy format, which requires reset at the end of every episode. South Park lets things be permanent sometimes. It lets growth and change and loss accumulate in ways that make the present episodes richer because of the past. The friendship between Stan and Kyle means something specific now that it could not have meant in Season 2. Because of all the tests it has been put through, all the crises it has survived, all the moments when the two of them have been on opposite sides and had to find their way back. That kind of depth is bought with 27 years of consistent storytelling, of choices that compounded rather than reset. This is the long arc. This is what happens to a show that keeps growing rather than consolidating. It becomes genuinely complex, not complicated in the way that a tangled plot is complicated, but complex in the way that a long friendship is complex, with a history and a texture and a set of resonances that simple summary cannot capture. When you watch a new South Park episode now, you are watching it with 27 years of context that makes the jokes and the characters and the choices land differently than they could for a first-time viewer. The show has built a world, and the world has depth, and the depth rewards attention. That is, in the end, the highest compliment you can pay to long-form storytelling. It rewards coming back. It rewards staying. Family Guy rewards coming back too, in the simpler pleasure of familiar company. The characters are comfortable and recognizable. The jokes reliably land at a certain frequency. There is real value in that. But the deeper reward, the reward of seeing how something has grown, of understanding a character now in ways that are only possible because of everything that came before, that reward is not available in a show that has not grown. Drift here for a moment in the warmth of this thought. Think about the stories in your own life that have depth because of their length. The friendships, the relationships, the places that you have known long enough that they have histories inside them, layers of meaning that new acquaintances cannot yet access. South Park has something like that. It has earned something like that. And it is a remarkable achievement in the commercial and institutional context of American animated television that it has been allowed to. We have more road ahead. Let us keep going. Section 10. The film, the music, the culture. There is a theory about great creative works that says the best ones overflow their original container. They do not stay inside the form in which they were first made. They spill over into other forms, find new expressions, discover that what they were trying to do required more than one medium to fully accomplish it. The great novelists wrote essays and letters that are just as essential as their fiction. The great filmmakers made documentaries and shorts that illuminate their features. The great musicians wrote songs that turned into symphonies or symphonies that turned into ballets. South Park has overflowed its container. It has not stayed inside the half-hour animated episode. It has spilled into film and theater and music and internet culture and the broader conversation about what comedy can be and what it is for. And every one of those overflows has said something essential about the creative vision behind the show. Let us start with the film. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was released in June of 1999, just 2 years after the show premiered. The show was still in its infancy, still establishing itself, still finding the boundaries of what it could do. And in that context, Parker and Stone chose to make an R-rated theatrical film that was, among other things, a full-scale Broadway-style musical, complete with an overture, 11 original songs, a love story, a battle between America and Canada, the intervention of Satan, and a blistering satirical argument about censorship and parental responsibility. The film received an Academy Award nomination for the song Blame Canada, which is one of the most precise pieces of satirical music ever written. A song that is simultaneously funny and politically sharp and structurally perfect. A song that manages to critique American scapegoating while also being exactly as catchy and performable as a real Broadway production number. The nomination was unprecedented for an animated film of this kind. The film was genuinely good, not just good for a South Park project, not good with reservations, but genuinely by any critical standard, a remarkable piece of work. What is interesting about the film in the context of everything we have been discussing tonight is the ambition of it. Here is a show that is 2 years old. Here are two young creators who have, as of the summer of 1999, demonstrated that they can make very funny, very edgy half-hour episodes of television. And rather than making a film that is essentially a very long episode, which is what most television to film adaptations are, they have made something that uses the theatrical context to do things the show cannot do, that takes advantage of the larger canvas, the larger sound system, the larger emotional stakes of the movie-going experience. The film's argument about censorship is one of the most pointed pieces of political comedy of its era. The premise that American parents, disturbed by the foul language in a Canadian film, declare war on Canada, while the government simultaneously creates a V-chip program to punish children for swearing, is transparently an allegory for the panic about the show itself and shows like it. The MPAA and the FCC and the Parents Television Council and every other institution that had spent the previous 2 years being outraged by South Park is being directly mocked in a theatrical release that those same institutions presumably attempted to suppress or at least constrain. The meta quality of this, using the form that is being criticized to make the criticism, is sophisticated in a way that very few comedy films have ever achieved. Then there is the music. Parker's ability to write songs is one of the most underappreciated aspects of South Park's creative achievement. The show has produced hundreds of original songs across its 27 seasons, and many of them are not just good for a television comedy. They are good full stop. Genuinely well-constructed songs with melodic hooks, harmonic logic, real emotional content, and performances that would hold up outside of the comedic context in which they appear. Think about Kyle's Mama's a Bitch, which is a musical pastiche of cheerful Broadway melody underpinning genuinely vicious lyrics, constructed with such technical precision that the gap between the form and the content is where all the humor lives. Think about what would Brian Boitano do from the film, which is a dead-accurate parody of the kind of triumphant anthem that 80s and 90s sports films deployed. Right down to the key change and the building instrumental break. Think about I'm Super, the flamboyant showstopper from the film that parodies the kind of musical theater number that celebrates self-regard so accurately that it works equally well as parody and as the thing being parodied. But the songs that most reveal Parker's genuine musical gift are not the parodies. They are the original compositions, the songs that are not making fun of anything, that are just trying to be good songs in their own right, and that frequently succeed. All-Star Winter Vacation, a country ballad that opens one of the Christmas episodes, is a real country ballad. It would not be out of place on an actual country album. The South Park theme itself, credited to Primus, is a perfectly constructed piece of TV theme music. Immediate, catchy, tonally distinctive. The Book of Mormon's score, which Parker and Stone wrote together, is one of the most sophisticated Broadway scores of the past 20 years, mixing pastiche and original invention with a fluency that most theater composers never achieve. McFarlane is also musically gifted. His singing voice is genuinely impressive. His love of the Great American Songbook is sincere and deep, and Family Guy's musical moments reflect a real musician's engagement with the material. But there is a difference between being a skilled interpreter of existing musical traditions and being a composer who can originate new things within those traditions. And Parker and Stone, particularly through the Book of Mormon, have demonstrated the latter capacity in a way that few comedy writers ever have. The Book of Mormon itself deserves more than a passing mention here because it is arguably the most significant single creative achievement either show's creators have produced. It opened on Broadway in March of 2011, and it won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, Best Score, Best Book of a Musical, and Best Direction. It is the story of 2 Mormon missionaries sent to Uganda, and it manages, over the course of 2.5 hours, to be simultaneously one of the funniest and one of the most genuinely moving pieces of musical theater produced in the 21st century. What is most remarkable about the Book of Mormon, in the context of everything we have been discussing tonight, is that it demonstrates the South Park creative philosophy fully realized in a longer form. The show is not simply making fun of Mormonism. It is not anti-religious propaganda dressed up in musical theater. It is a genuinely complex examination of the human need for story and meaning, and of the question of whether a story can be valuable even if its factual claims are false. The missionaries are ridiculous, but they are also lovable. The Ugandan community they are sent to help is not patronized or exoticized. It is treated with real respect and genuine comic intelligence. The theological critique is real, and the theological sympathy is also real. And holding both of these simultaneously is the show's greatest awe-formal achievement. No Family Guy equivalent exists. There is no Family Guy film that achieved what the South Park film achieved. There is no Family Guy theater production that demonstrated the kind of creative ambition that the Book of Mormon demonstrates. MacFarlane has pursued musical projects. His albums of big band standards are pleasant and skillfully produced, but they are the work of an interpreter, not an originator. They express his love of an existing tradition rather than his capacity to extend that tradition. The cultural impact of South Park, beyond the show itself, has been significant in ways that are difficult to quantify but easy to feel. The show has contributed phrases and concepts to the broader cultural vocabulary in ways that outlive the episodes that originated them. The term Cartman has entered usage in certain contexts as shorthand for a particular kind of manipulative self-righteousness. The show's epistemological framing, the idea that there are two equally unacceptable extremes on most cultural questions, with the truth somewhere in the uncomfortable middle, has influenced how a generation thinks about political discourse. The phrase, "you'll be shocked by how this ends," became, for a period, the standard way to describe the South Park narrative structure where a seemingly frivolous premise arrives at a genuinely serious destination. South Park has been a cultural force in ways that go beyond its episode count. It has shaped conversations, influenced other creators, contributed ideas and frames and vocabulary to the culture in ways that continue to circulate long after the specific episodes that originated them have been half forgotten. That is what genuine creative significance looks like. It overflows its container, it becomes part of the vocabulary. Family Guy has been part of the culture too, in important and real ways. Its characters are recognizable worldwide. Its format, the cutaway gag, the rapid-fire reference, the joke that pivots away from the emotional stakes of a scene to something completely unrelated, has influenced animation and comedy broadly. The show is part of the furniture of contemporary popular culture in a way that should not be dismissed. But between a show that has become part of the furniture and a show that has changed the room, there is a difference. And South Park has changed the room. Let the music play softly in the background of your imagination as you rest here. Let the melodies of 27 seasons of original composition drift through the dark. Let the songs that are both funny and real, both satirical and genuinely felt, find their way to the part of you that responds to music before language. Something is here, something earned, something that will still be here when you wake. Section 11, Legacy and the Long Game. We're settling now into the later hours of this night, and the pace of our journey is becoming gentler still. The big arguments have been made. The evidence has been examined from multiple angles. What remains is the longer view, the assessment of what these shows mean, not just as television programs, but as cultural achievements, as things that happened in the world and changed it in small and large ways, as contributions to the ongoing conversation about what comedy is for and what it can do. South Park premiered on August 13, 1997. As of its 27th season, it has produced well over 300 episodes. The exact count, depending on whether you include specials, theatrical releases, and interactive content. It has been renewed through at least season 30, which would take it to roughly 2027. It has, in 2021, signed a deal with Paramount Plus worth a reported $900 million, renegotiated in subsequent years as the streaming landscape shifted, that secured both the back catalog and future episodes for the platform. That is a $900 million vote of confidence in the continued cultural relevance of a crudely animated show about four children in a Colorado mountain town. The longevity itself is remarkable, but what is more remarkable is that the longevity has not come at the cost of the show's essential nature. South Park in 2025 is recognizably the same show as South Park in 1997, in the sense that it has the same DNA, the same creative principles, the same satirical instincts, the same refusal to be comfortable or comforting. But it is also genuinely developed in ways that make the contemporary show richer and more complex than the early seasons, rather than simply older and more tired. This is genuinely rare. Television is full of shows that have preserved their identities by remaining exactly the same, by refusing to grow, by delivering the same pleasures in the same packaging season after season. And television is full of shows that have lost their identities through growth that went wrong, that mutated into something their creators and their audiences no longer recognized. Achieving genuine growth while preserving genuine identity is extraordinarily difficult, and South Park has gotten closer to achieving it than almost any other animated comedy in the history of the medium. Family Guy's legacy is real and should be acknowledged with genuine respect. The show that debuted in 1999 changed animation. It brought a style of comedy to the medium. The rapid-fire reference, the disconnected cutaway, the assumption that the audience was culturally omnivorous and would appreciate jokes that required knowing a broad range of pop culture that had not been fully realized before and that influenced the entire subsequent generation of animated comedy. American Dad, Bob's Burgers, Archer, Rick and Morty. These shows all exist in a landscape that Family Guy helped create. The show's revival after 2 cancellations is a genuine piece of television history. No show before Family Guy had come back from 2 cancellations and not only survived, but thrived. The fact that it happened was a demonstration of the power of a fan base, of what an audience that genuinely loves a show can accomplish through the force of their attention and their purchasing decisions. Family Guy taught the television industry that cancellation is not necessarily permanent, that the relationship between a show and its audience can persist and even intensify during an absence, and that the metrics of first-run broadcast ratings are not the only measure of a show's cultural significance. This lesson has been learned and applied many times since. But legacy is complicated, and the legacy of Family Guy includes both its genuine achievements and its genuine failures. The Meg Griffin problem is a real part of the legacy. The gradual Flanderization of Peter Griffin is a real part of the legacy. The increasing reliance on shock value and extended gags in place of genuine storytelling is a real part of the legacy. A show's legacy includes not just what it did well, but what it chose to do instead of the harder, better thing. And Family Guy made a series of choices over the years that traded the more difficult rewards of genuine storytelling for the easier rewards of reliable entertainment. South Park's legacy also includes failures, and intellectual honesty requires acknowledging them. There are South Park episodes that were wrong in ways that caused real harm. There are moments when the equal opportunity discomfort principle was applied carelessly, when the show punched down without the insight that is the only justification for punching down. There are seasons that felt like the show was simply repeating its own formula, without the energy that made the formula interesting. The show has stumbled repeatedly across 27 years. But when you look at the overall arc, when you step back far enough to see the shape of it, South Park's legacy is one of remarkable creative integrity. It is a show that started with a vision and has spent 27 years developing and deepening that vision rather than commodifying it. It is a show that has consistently prioritized what it wanted to say over what its audience wanted to hear. It is a show that has used its longevity not just to fill time but to grow, to discover new things about its characters and its world, and the satirical possibilities of its particular lens on American life. The streaming numbers are relevant. I'm relevant here. When Paramount Plus acquired the South Park catalog, the show became, according to multiple streaming analytics services, one of the most streamed shows on any platform, consistently placing in the top 20 most watched programs across all of streaming. This is a show that has been on the air for 27 years, and people are watching it in larger numbers on streaming than they ever watched it on cable. That is not what legacy television shows typically do. It suggests that the show's audience is not just loyal, but actively growing, that new generations are discovering it and finding it relevant to their moment in ways that shows built on more topical references cannot replicate. The reason for this, ultimately, is the timelessness that comes from targeting the eternal rather than the current. South Park's best episodes are not about what happened in 1997 or 2006. They're about the human qualities, the self-righteousness, the tribalism, the capacity for self-deception, the tendency to construct narratives of victimhood or heroism that justify pre-existing desires, that are present in every generation. These qualities do not age. They are always with us, wearing different clothes, speaking different languages, gathering around different flags. And a show that targets them precisely enough will always find an audience because the targets are always present. Family Guy will also be watched. It will be streamed and rewatched and clipped and shared because it contains genuinely great moments. Individual gags and performances that represent real comedy achievement. But it will be watched for its highlights, for the clips rather than the episodes, for the moments rather than the stories. It will be watched the way you listen to a greatest hits album, for the parts you love, not for the overall shape of the thing. South Park will be watched differently. The best South Park seasons will be watched as complete seasons because the individual episodes build on each other in ways that individual clips cannot capture. The show has the kind of integrity that requires the full experience, that rewards the committed viewer with something unavailable to the casual one. That is a rarer and more valuable thing. These two shows will both endure. They are both part of what American comedy was in this era, both expressions of a particular cultural moment, both evidence of what the animated medium can do when talented people are given the freedom to do ambitious things. But one of them has earned the right to be called great in the full and demanding sense of that word. Great not just at what it does, but at what it attempts. Great not just in its moments, but in its arc. Great not just in its jokes, but in what its jokes are for. South Park has earned that word. It has fought for it across 27 years in 6-day bursts of creative intensity, in the mountains of Colorado, and in the imagination of two people who refuse to be comfortable. It has earned it. Rest here for a while. The night is deep, and the argument is mostly made. There is just one section remaining, and it is the quietest one. The one where we bring everything together and let it dissolve into the dark. Section 12. Why it still matters tonight. We have come a long way together tonight, through the origin stories and the production schedules, through the characters and the courage and the cutaway gags, through the music and the film and the theater and the numbers. We have moved slowly and deliberately through a lot of territory, and now we are here in the final stretch, where the argument does not need to be made anymore because it has already been made. And what remains is just the feeling of it, the warm, quiet understanding that settles in when you have followed something all the way to its end. Let me tell you why any of this matters. Not why South Park is better than Family Guy. We have covered that at length. from many angles, and the argument stands in its own weight. But why it matters at all, tonight in the dark, to you. Comedy is one of the most important things human beings do. Not in spite of being funny, but because of it. The laugh is one of the most honest responses available to us. You cannot fake a real laugh the way you can fake other responses. Something is genuinely funny to you or it is not, and the fact that it is funny often tells you something true. About the absurdity of power, about the distance between how things are supposed to work and how they actually work, about the gap between human pretension and human reality that is the engine of all genuine comedy. When a piece of comedy is genuinely great, when it is not just landing jokes but earning them, not just entertaining but illuminating, it does something for the people who experience it that very few other things can do. It gives them a shared language for truths that are difficult to say directly. It allows people to acknowledge things about the human condition, about their own condition, that would be unbearable without the permission of the laugh. It creates, for the length of an episode or a film or a song, a community of people who are all seeing the same thing and recognizing it together. South Park has done this. For 27 years, it has offered a particular kind of community, not a comfortable or affirming one, not one that lets you feel certain you are right, but a genuinely honest one, a community of people who are willing to be uncertain together, who are willing to see themselves in the targets, as well as the targets in themselves. This is an unusual and valuable thing to offer. It takes courage to accept it, and it rewards the acceptance with something genuine. What does it mean specifically tonight, on this particular night, in whatever season of your life you are inhabiting? It means that somewhere out in the world, two men are probably working on something that will arrive in less than a week, that will say something about the human circus as it is performing tonight, that will try to be honest even when honesty is uncomfortable, that will chase the laugh that comes from recognition, even when the recognition is unwelcome. It means that the show that started with a VHS tape being passed hand to hand is still doing essentially the same thing, still carrying the same restless energy, still refusing to be comfortable or comforting. And it means that a show that started on the other side of this comparison, a show that had every advantage, every resource, the largest debut audience an animated comedy had ever had, chose a different path. Chose comfort over challenge, familiarity over growth, the reliable laugh over the harder and more honest one. This is not a condemnation. It is a description of a real creative choice, made by real human beings with real pressures and real constraints and real gifts. The people who made Family Guy are talented. The show gave a lot of people a lot of pleasure for a long time. That is not nothing. That is genuinely something. But South Park chose to be great rather than successful. Or more precisely, it chose to be great and discovered, to its own apparent surprise, that being genuinely great could also be remarkably successful. That the $900 million streaming deal and the sold-out Broadway run and the streaming numbers that rival shows a fraction of its age were not in spite of the show's integrity, but because of it. That audiences, given the choice between being entertained and being genuinely engaged, will eventually choose the engagement if the engagement is offered with enough skill and honesty. This is the long game. This is what winning the long game looks like in the creative economy of American television. Not the biggest premiere, not the fastest growth, not the most merchandise or the most consistent weekly ratings. The long game is being watched, with genuine enthusiasm and genuine investment, by people who were not alive when you first premiered. The long game is mattering more to the culture in year 27 than you did in year 7, because the thing you were building required 27 years of accumulation to fully realize. South Park is winning the long game. Family Guy played a different game, a game with faster rewards and lower creative stakes, and, in the end, a lower ceiling. Both games have value, but only one of them leads where we want to go. As you drift now toward the end of this night, toward the edge of sleep where thoughts become soft and the distinctions between things begin to blur, hold on to whatever piece of this story settled deepest in you. Maybe it was the image of 6-day production schedules, of creative urgency so intense it produces something that should not exist. Maybe it was Cartman's psychology, the monstrous precision of him, the way the show has spent 27 years mapping the territory of human selfishness with the thoroughness of a cartographer. Maybe it was the Book of Mormon, the overflow of creative ambition finding a new container and filling it completely. Maybe it was just the mountains, the cold, thin, amused air of a Colorado mountain town that watches the parade of human certainty and stupidity with the patience of geography. Take whatever piece resonates and let the rest dissolve into the background noise of a night well spent. We have covered a lot of ground together, you and I, in the quiet hours. We have sat with 2 shows and tried to understand them honestly, not to dismiss or celebrate, but to see clearly, to trace the decisions and the consequences, to follow the argument wherever it led. And it led here. To the conclusion that greatness in the long run is not about resources or ratings or the size of your debut audience. It is about the quality of your restlessness, about whether the people making the thing are genuinely trying to discover something or simply trying to deliver something they already know how to deliver. It is about whether the show, season after season, is asking questions it does not yet know how to answer, and trusting that the attempt to answer them, imperfect and urgent and sometimes wrong, is more valuable than the comfort of a question already solved. South Park is still asking questions. That is why it still matters. That is why it will still matter tomorrow and next year and in 10 years when the streaming numbers are probably even higher and there are viewers watching it who will not be born for another 2 years. The questions are still alive. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. Rest now. The night is yours. Let the credits roll somewhere in the quiet of the room. Let the simple, cheap animation of a Colorado mountain bus stop dissolve into the dark behind your eyes. Let the voices of 4 small boys fade into the kind of silence that is not empty but full. Full of the 27 years of stories that brought us here. Full of the music and the arguments and the honest, restless, ridiculous, brilliant pursuit of the joke that is also true. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for traveling all this way through the story with me. If any of this landed for you, if any part of it made you think or feel or remember something worth remembering, then we built something together in this dark, you and I, and that is the whole point. That is all that any of this was ever for. Sleep well. The mountains are still there. The air is still thin and cold and clear. And somewhere in the creative distance, something is being made. If you made it all the way here with me tonight, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. A like and a subscribe means more than you might think. It tells the algorithm that this kind of deep, slow, thoughtful content is worth showing to the next person who needs a long night of this kind of company. Leave a comment below, Bagato. I read every single one. And tell me what time it is where you are and what made you stay all the way to the end. Was it Cartman? The production schedule? The Book of Mormon? I genuinely want to know. Thank you for watching Uncle Guy Lore. This was a long one, and it was worth every word. See you in the next one. Bonus section. The Cartman Deep Dive. The most complete comedy villain in television history. We have talked about Cartman already in the section on characters, but he deserves more. He demands more. Eric Theodore Cartman is, across 27 seasons, one of the most precisely and relentlessly developed character studies in the history of American comedy. And the depth of that study is worth sitting with at length on a night like this, when there is no rush and the quiet is full. Most comedy villains are comic foils. They exist to be defeated, to be the butt of the joke, to function as an obstacle that the more sympathetic characters have to navigate around or overcome. Think of the classic sitcom antagonist, the nosy neighbor, the petty boss, the rival who always ends up embarrassed in the final act. These characters are satisfying in small doses, but they are not complex. They are instruments of narrative function dressed up in personality. Cartman is not a foil. Cartman wins. Not always, not every episode, but often enough and thoroughly enough that the wins carry the disturbing quality of genuine comprehension. When Cartman defeats Kyle, emotionally, strategically, materially, it does not feel like a temporary setback in a story that is clearly moving toward Kyle's eventual triumph. It feels like the universe has confirmed something, has delivered a verdict on the relative efficacy of Cartman's methods versus Kyle's. This is one of the most honest things South Park does. It acknowledges that people like Cartman often succeed in the real world, not in spite of their methods, but because of them. The willingness to lie, to manipulate, to position every situation as a narrative of victimhood or righteous grievance, to treat other people purely as means to personal ends. These qualities are not obstacles to success in American public life. They are, in many contexts, effective strategies. Cartman embodies this truth with a comprehensiveness that no satire this side of Jonathan Swift has ever achieved. But what makes Cartman more than just a cartoon sociopath is that Parker and Stone have, across the seasons, shown us glimpses of what lies beneath the monster. There are moments, rare handled with extreme care, when we see that the Cartman persona is, at some level, armor. That the child inside the armor is wounded in some way that produces the grandiosity and the cruelty as defense mechanisms. The episode about his father's identity, the relationships with his mother, whose permissiveness is its own kind of damage, the friendships, real friendships, in moments when Cartman is not actively working an angle, that suggest the presence of an emotional need so profound and so frightening to him that the only way he knows how to manage it is to deny it entirely. These glimpses are never dwelt on. Parker and Stone are too smart to turn Cartman into a sympathetic figure. They know that the comedy and the commentary require him to remain fundamentally monstrous. But the glimpses are enough to give the monstrousness depth, to make it feel like the result of something rather than simply a feature of the character's design. Cartman is not evil as a creative shorthand. He is evil as the outcome of a particular history, a particular set of conditions, a particular failure of the people and institutions that were supposed to provide the scaffolding that a developing person requires. This makes every Cartman episode a dual story. The story of what he is doing this episode, and the story of what he is at the level of human psychology and human formation. Both stories are present simultaneously, and the best Cartman episodes hold both in balance with extraordinary precision. Think about the episodes where Cartman becomes a cause celebrity, where he mistakes some accident of circumstance for genuine recognition of his greatness, and pursues the recognition with all the intensity of someone who has been waiting all his life to be told that his sense of himself is justified. There is something genuinely painful in these moments, under the comedy, the recognition of how desperately some part of him needs external validation, and how catastrophically unsuited his actual personality is to receiving it gracefully. The craving and the incapacity to satisfy it are both on display simultaneously, and the tension between them is where the comedy lives. Kyle exists in permanent relationship to all of this, and Kyle's relationship to Cartman is one of the most carefully observed friendships. And I use that word deliberately because on some level they are friends, however much they hate each other. In television, Kyle knows Cartman better than anyone else. He can see through the manipulations in real time, in the way that only someone who's been manipulated repeatedly by the same person eventually learns to see. And yet he is still susceptible. still capable of being drawn in, still capable of being convinced that this time will be different. This is not a failure of Kyle's intelligence. It is a feature of his decency. He keeps giving Cartman the benefit of the doubt, not because he is stupid, but because the alternative, giving up on someone entirely, declaring another human being irredeemable, is something Kyle's conscience cannot quite bring itself to do. He is, in this way, a better person than the show's universe seems to reward. And that gap between his goodness and its rewards is one of the most consistently moving things in all of South Park. The relationship between Cartman's monstrousness and Kyle's conscience is essentially the whole show in miniature. It is the question that South Park has been asking for 27 years. What do good instincts do against bad ones, in a world where the bad ones are often more strategically effective? Does goodness matter in an environment that does not systematically reward it? Kyle keeps trying to answer yes. Cartman keeps providing evidence to the contrary. The show never definitively resolves the question, because the question does not have a definitive answer, and a show that pretended it did would be a lesser show. This is what a great villain does for a story. Not just provide an obstacle or a source of comedy, but embody an argument, a case for a particular view of human nature and human possibility that the other characters have to engage with, that cannot be dismissed, that has to be taken seriously because the evidence for it keeps accumulating. Cartman is that kind of villain. He is an argument that the show takes seriously precisely because the show does not agree with it. In the long comparison with Family Guy, this is perhaps the most fundamental difference. Family Guy's humor comes from the recognition of types. The lovable idiot, the smart dog, the evil baby, the ignored teenager. South Park's humor, at its best, comes from something much more demanding: the recognition of truths. Uncomfortable, complex, unresolved truths about what people are like and why, and what that means for the project of living in communities with each other. Cartman is the primary vehicle for those truths, and his 27-year development is one of the great achievements of the form. Let him settle in the darkness behind your eyes, the boy in the parka, the monster in the armchair, the argument that the show keeps making and refusing to win. There is something almost tender in the way Parker and Stone keep returning to him, keep finding new things in him, keep refusing to let him be simple. He deserves that refusal. He has earned it. Bonus section: the Make Love, Not Warcraft episode, a case study in perfect television. There are episodes of television that arrive at a moment of total creative alignment, where every element of the show is working at exactly the level it needs to work, where the premise is perfectly calibrated, where the characters are used precisely right, where the comedy and the observation and the technical execution come together without any visible seams. These episodes are rare and they are treasures. When they exist in a show's catalog, they serve as evidence of what the show is capable of at its best, as a standard that all subsequent episodes are implicitly measured against. Make Love Not Warcraft, which aired in Season 10 of South Park in October of 2006, is one of these episodes. It is, by the consensus of critics, fans, and the industry, it won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program that year, one of the great single episodes of animated comedy, and examining it closely tells you essentially everything you need to know about why South Park is the show it is. The premise: a player in the massively multiplayer online game World of Warcraft has achieved such a high level that he can kill any other player instantly, even characters a much higher level, and is using this ability to repeatedly kill other players and make the game unplayable for them. The boys decide to train for months, playing World of Warcraft obsessively to level up their characters to a point where they can defeat this enemy and save the game they love. This is a perfect South Park premise for several reasons. It is immediately comprehensible to anyone who has spent time in online gaming communities. The experience of encountering a player who is using superior ability not to play the game but to ruin it for others is universal and specific and immediately irritating. It provides a mission structure that allows the episode to escalate naturally. It connects to a genuine cultural moment. World of Warcraft in 2006 was at the peak of its cultural dominance, a game played by millions of people who were, at that exact moment, recognizing in Cartman's description of their hobby both its pleasures and its embarrassments. But the premise alone does not make the episode great. What makes it great is the decision to take it seriously. Parker and Stone, in developing the episode, contacted Blizzard Entertainment, the company that makes World of Warcraft, and secured their cooperation, including access to actual game footage that was integrated seamlessly into the animation. The episode alternates between the live-action look of the real game and the South Park animation style, and the integration is perfect. It does not feel like a parody of a game. It feels like a genuine engagement with the game, made by people who understand what they are depicting. The characterization in the episode is exactly right. Cartman's obsession with leveling up as fast as possible, his willingness to spend months literally not leaving his computer chair in service of a goal, gaining the power to defeat an enemy, is completely consistent with everything we know about Cartman. The scale of the sacrifice makes sense for him. He is the character who would do this. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny go along because they believe in the mission, and because they believe in Cartman's ability to commit to something absolutely when his motivation is strong enough. Even the brief appearance of parents, Randy Marsh appearing in his son's room to deliver what he thinks is an inspirational speech about real life versus video games, and being gently ignored, is perfectly calibrated, perfectly Randy. The episode's climax, when the boys defeat the enemy player in a moment that Blizzard's own staff within the episode call the most epic battle in the history of World of Warcraft, lands with genuine satisfaction. The satisfaction of a mission completed, of effort rewarded, of the underdog prevailing through commitment rather than natural advantage. And then the post-climax moment. Having saved the game, the boys log back in, look at each other, and decide to start playing again. The cycle of commitment and obsession and ruination of one's physical self will continue. Because the game is too good to stop playing. This is the South Park rhythm at its best. The comedy and the observation arrive at the same moment. The episode has made you laugh throughout, but it has also made you recognize something. About the nature of online community, about the specific pleasure of games like World of Warcraft, about the psychology of the player who ruins things for others, and about the genuine value of the commitment that the boys display, however absurdly it manifests. The ridiculous and the earnest are held together without irony, canceling the earnestness, or the earnestness canceling the comedy. Family Guy cannot make this episode, not because of any lack of technical skill, but because Family Guy does not have characters with this kind of specific, developed psychology. If Family Guy made an episode about a video game, it would be a series of cutaway gags about things that happen in video games, with Peter being bad at the game in various ways. It would be funny in parts. It would not arrive at a destination. It would not feel at the end like you had spent 22 minutes with real people in a real situation, discovering something true. The Make Love, Not Warcraft episode is South Park at its best. And South Park at its best is one of the best things American television has ever produced. That is not a claim made lightly, and it is not a claim that needs qualification. It is simply a description of what the episode does and where it sits in the history of the medium. Bonus section: The Imagination Land Trilogy, When Ambition Becomes Spectacle. If the Make Love Not Warcraft episode represents South Park at the level of precise, perfectly calibrated single-episode storytelling, The Imagination Land trilogy from season 11 represents something different. South Park at the level of grand, slightly excessive, delightfully overreaching creative ambition. The Imagination Land trilogy, 3 consecutive episodes that form a single extended narrative, is the result of Parker and Stone deciding that they wanted to tell a story about the nature of imagination itself. The premise is a thought experiment that escalates to the point of absurdity and keeps going past that point until it arrives somewhere genuinely interesting. What if the world of imaginary characters, every fictional creation in human history, every character from every story ever told, was a real place? What if that place could be threatened? What would it mean to defend it? The trilogy begins with Cartman making a bet with Kyle about whether leprechauns are real. A characteristically Cartman bet, entered into with characteristic Cartman certainty, and escalates within 2 episodes to a scenario where the entire population of Imagination Land, including every positive fictional character humans have ever created, is under attack from the most dangerous negative, fictional characters who have been weaponized by terrorists. The military has been brought in. A nuclear strike has been authorized. The fate of human imagination hangs in the balance. This is genuinely audacious. It is audacious in the way that only a show with complete confidence in its own creative voice can be audacious. Not recklessly or carelessly, but with a sense that the premise has been thought through, that the creative choices have been made deliberately, that someone knows what they are building. The trilogy brings in characters from every corner of human storytelling. Luke Skywalker and Morpheus from The Matrix, and the Ninja Turtles and Aslan from Narnia and Santa Claus and Jesus Christ, and 100 others. The scope of the casting is itself comedic, but the episode is not simply playing for laughs from the recognition of characters. It is using those characters to make an argument about the value of storytelling, about why the things we imagine matter, about the function of fictional characters in human emotional and moral life, about what we lose if we lose the capacity to create and inhabit imaginary worlds. The argument lands. Not elegantly, not without some pacing issues across the 3 episodes, not without moments that feel overstuffed even by South Park standards, but it lands. And it lands in a way that a more cautious piece of storytelling, one that had decided in advance how big it could get, how much it could attempt, would never have the opportunity to land. This is the spirit of South Park's creative ambition in its most expansive form. The willingness to overreach slightly, to risk looking foolish by trying too much, in pursuit of something that a more conservative approach could never achieve. Family Guy has never overreached in this direction. Family Guy has always known exactly how big it is willing to get, and has stayed carefully within those limits. There is safety in those limits. There is also a ceiling, and the ceiling is lower than the one South Park has found by being willing to aim above it. Bonus section: The Randy Marsh Transformation, a character study in American masculinity. We have mentioned Randy Marsh multiple times throughout this night's journey, always in service of a larger point about character development or storytelling, or the creative maturity of South Park's later seasons. But Randy deserves his own space, his own section, his own moment of sustained attention. Because what the show has done with him over 27 years is one of the most complete and honest comedic portraits of a particular kind of American man ever produced. Randy Marsh was introduced in the very first season as a simple function. He was Stan's father, a geologist, present when the story required a parent to react to something or provide exposition. He had no particular personality beyond generic, competent adulthood. He was background. Then, gradually, imperceptibly at first, and then with gathering speed, something happened. Parker and Stone began to give Randy more to do, and in giving him more to do, they discovered something about him, or perhaps revealed something about themselves and the people they had grown up around that proved to be inexhaustible. Randy Marsh is, at his core, a man who is always absolutely certain that he is right, and who pursues his certainty with an intensity so disproportionate to the actual stakes of his various convictions that the gap between his confidence and the world's actual response to him is the engine of almost unlimited comedy. Randy is a man of passions. His passions change constantly. He becomes obsessed with something, a sport, a cause, a business venture, a cultural moment, and pursues it with a commitment that is simultaneously admirable and disastrous, because the commitment is always in inverse proportion to his actual understanding of what he is committed to. He is the man who becomes the most intense fan of something the week before that thing stops being popular, who arrives at every party one beat behind the rhythm, who is always convinced that this time he has found the thing that will prove his greatness. The Tegrity Farm storyline, which ran across multiple seasons starting in season 22, is the fullest expression of this character. Randy moves his family to a farm to grow marijuana after Colorado legalizes it, and pursues his marijuana business with the same righteously confident incompetence he brings to everything else. The storyline is partly a parody of the discourse around legalization, the performative progressivism, the corporate co-optation of counterculture, the gap between what people say about their choices and what those choices actually look like, and partly just a character study of a man who will never run out of ways to dress up his selfishness as something more admirable. What makes the Tegrity storyline work over multiple seasons is that Parker and Stone never lose sight of the genuine love underneath Randy's failures. He loves Sharon. He loves Stan. His desire to be a good husband and father is real, even though his capacity to act on that desire is consistently undermined by his inability to see himself clearly. This is the saving grace of the character, not that he learns or grows in any permanent way, but that the love is genuine even when the behavior is atrocious. It makes him human rather than simply a target. The relationship between Randy and Stan across all of these seasons is one of the most quietly affecting things in the show. Stan watches his father with a particular mixture of exasperation and helpless affection that is one of the most recognizable emotional experiences of adulthood. The experience of loving someone who is genuinely impossible, who you cannot fix and cannot stop caring about. Stan's face in many Randy episodes says everything about this experience without any dialogue being necessary. Family Guy's male characters do not carry this kind of emotional weight. Peter Griffin is funny. He is genuinely, reliably, sometimes brilliantly funny, but he does not illuminate anything about the particular experience of being a certain kind of man in America in the same way that Randy does. Peter is a type, deployed with skill. Randy is a portrait developed with love and rigor, and the patience to let the portrait become more complex over time rather than simpler. This distinction between the type and the portrait is the deepest version of the argument we have been making all night. South Park paints portraits. Family Guy deploys types. Both have value, but the portrait done well is the more complete thing. Bonus section. What the numbers actually tell us. Streaming legacy and the new metrics of success. In an earlier section, we touched on the ratings decline of Family Guy and the streaming success of South Park. But the numbers deserve more careful examination, because they tell a story about the changing relationship between television shows and their audiences that is genuinely interesting in its own right. The television landscape of 2025 looks almost nothing like the landscape of 1999, when both South Park and Family Guy were finding their footing. In 1999, a show was measured entirely by its first-run ratings. How many people watched it when it first aired, in the window of network broadcast, measured by the Nielsen system. This was the only metric that mattered. A show with high first-run ratings got renewed, A show with low first-run ratings got canceled. The end. This system was not designed for shows that develop audiences over time, that find their most passionate fans through word of mouth rather than through promotional campaigns, that reward the kind of committed and attentive viewing that builds slowly rather than arriving fully formed. The system rewarded spectacle and novelty, the premiere that drew a huge number because everyone was curious, and punished the kind of patient accumulation that produces the deepest loyalty. Both South Park and Family Guy suffered under this system in their early years. South Park had modest first-run ratings for much of its early run, nothing like the massive numbers that The Simpsons was generating. Family Guy, notoriously, was canceled twice under a system that could not properly measure the passion of its audience outside of the first-run broadcast window. But the streaming era has changed the metrics. Now a show's value is measured not just by how many people watch it when it first airs, but by how many people watch it, period. On any platform, at any time, in any country. And in this new metric environment, South Park's particular strengths look very different than they looked under the old system. South Park, available on Paramount Plus and through syndication across multiple platforms, has been among the most streamed shows in the world consistently since the streaming era began. In the first half of 2025, it ranked in the top 20 most streamed programs across all platforms, outperforming shows with far more resources and far more promotional support. This is a show that is 27 years old, that looks cheap by contemporary animation standards, that is produced on a budget that would barely cover a single episode of a prestige drama. And it is one of the most watched things on the internet. Why? The answer connects to everything we have discussed tonight. A show that targets eternal human qualities rather than topical events does not age. A show with genuinely complex characters and genuinely satisfying narrative arcs rewards rewatching in ways that a series of disconnected gag compilations does not. A show that is willing to be honest and uncomfortable and genuinely funny in ways that require attention creates the kind of loyalty that does not dissipate when the show stops being current. Family Guy is also streamed extensively. Its Hulu numbers are significant, its YouTube clip culture is enormous. But the nature of the streaming pattern is different. Family Guy is largely watched in clips and compilations, the greatest hits approach to consumption that we mentioned earlier. Individual moments are watched and shared and rewatched. The episodes themselves, as complete artistic units, are less compelling to the streaming viewer who has a choice about what to spend 22 minutes on. This distinction between a show whose individual episodes are worth their full runtime and a show whose individual moments are worth watching even if the episodes are not, maps directly onto everything we have said about storytelling and character. If the story matters, watch the episode. If the story is just a delivery vehicle for the jokes, skip to the jokes. South Park earns the full episode. Family Guy earns the clip. Neither of these is a failure in commercial terms. Both shows generate enormous streaming revenue. But the creative distinction that produces the commercial distinction is real and important, and the numbers, looked at carefully, confirm it. The $900 million Paramount Plus deal for South Park, its entire catalog plus future episodes, was one of the largest streaming deals in television history at the time it was announced. The number reflects not just current popularity, but anticipated longevity, the streamer's confidence that South Park will continue to be watched by audiences who do not yet exist. That is a remarkable vote of confidence in a show that started with paper cutout animation of 4 Colorado boys arguing about who had the better Christmas. Let the numbers settle. They are not the most important thing. The creative achievement is the most important thing. But they are the confirmation that the creative achievement has found its audience and will continue to find new ones. The long game played out in streaming analytics and licensing deals, and the ongoing accumulation of new viewers who discover the show and feel, watching it, that it is speaking directly to them across decades and generations, is being won. The mountain is still there, the air is still clear, the bus is still coming down the road. And the four boys waiting for it are still, after all these years, the most interesting children in the history of American television. Bonus section. The companion question. Why American Dad accidentally proves the South Park argument. There is a piece of evidence that exists entirely within the Family Guy universe that actually supports the case we have been making all night. And it is worth examining carefully because of how clearly it demonstrates that the problems with Family Guy were the result of choices, not fate. American Dad is a show created by Seth MacFarlane, along with co-creators Mike Barker and Matt Weitzman. It premiered on February 6, 2005, a few months before Family Guy returned from cancellation, and it aired on the same network on the same night in a similar format. On paper, it looked like a lesser version of Family Guy, a copycat, a little brother that would never escape the shadow of its more famous sibling. Something unexpected happened. American Dad got better. Over the course of its run, particularly after it moved from Fox to TBS in 2014, American Dad became, in the consensus view of critics and a substantial portion of the audiences for both shows, the better show. Not better in reputation, not better in first-run ratings, but better in the fundamental sense of being more consistently satisfying to watch, more character-driven, more willing to tell complete stories, rather than delivering random laughs. The most obvious structural difference between the two shows is that American Dad does not use cutaway gags. Roger the Alien's persona-shifting ability provides a kind of variation that cutaways provide in Family Guy. But the show's plots are internally coherent in a way that Family Guy's are not. Every joke has to come from the characters and the situation. The writers cannot escape a weak scene by cutting away to something unrelated. They have to write their way through. This forced the American Dad writing staff to develop storytelling muscles that the Family Guy writing staff, always able to fall back on the cutaway, never needed to build. And over the years, those muscles became visible. American Dad plots have actual stakes. American Dad characters have genuine arcs within episodes. The Stan Smith of Season 15 is recognizably the same person as the Stan Smith of Season 1. But he has been through things that have changed him in small but real ways. His relationship with Francine has developed actual history. His dynamic with Haley and Steve has evolved past the original character function of each person. Roger the Alien is a creative achievement that stands alongside the best character work South Park has done. The concept, an alien who survives among humans by adopting elaborate personas, complete with wigs and costumes and fully developed backstories, who is also a genuinely cruel and hedonistic entity beneath the costumes, is one of the most generative character concepts in the history of animated comedy. Unlike Stewie's evil genius concept, which the Family Guy writers eventually decided they had exhausted, the Roger persona concept is structurally inexhaustible. Every persona is a fresh start. Every episode can feature a version of Roger that has never been seen before. The concept does not run out because it is a meta concept, not a personality, but a principle of personality variation. The South Park parallel is obvious. Roger is doing, in the context of American Dad, what Cartman does in the context of South Park, functioning as a character whose specific concept is powerful enough to carry a disproportionate share of the show's creative weight, who never becomes stale because the writers have committed to developing the concept rather than simply repeating it. American Dad's improvement over Family Guy proves something crucial. The creative decisions that damaged Family Guy were not inevitable. They were choices. The same creator, in roughly the same time period, with roughly the same resources and roughly the same institutional context, also created a show that did not make those choices, that chose storytelling over cutaways, that chose character development over flanderization. That chose the harder path, and the harder path produced the better result. This is not a condemnation of McFarlane's creative instincts in any absolute sense. It is, if anything, evidence that his creative instincts are actually quite good. That when he or his collaborators are willing to apply those instincts rigorously, the results justify the effort. American Dad is what Family Guy could have been if the people running it had made different choices. That is the South Park argument applied from within the Family Guy universe, and it is one of the most compelling versions of it. The comparison also illuminates something about the relationship between a creator's direct involvement and a show's quality. McFarlane has been more absent from Family Guy than from American Dad and in the later seasons, and the shows have diverged in quality in ways that track that absence. But American Dad has been consistently guided by a writing staff that cares about storytelling, that had, from the beginning of the show, committed to a format that demands storytelling. And that commitment has protected the show from the kind of drift that affects a show whose primary comedy tool does not require narrative coherence. Format is destiny. A show that requires its writers to tell stories will develop storytelling ability. A show that allows its writers to substitute disconnected gags for stories will lose storytelling ability. This is not a statement about talent. It is a statement about discipline, about the way creative habits are formed by the tools and structures that creative people use every day. South Park's 6-day production schedule builds the habit of urgency. American Dad's no cutaway rule builds the habit of narrative coherence. Family Guy's cutaway format, available as a lifeline whenever the story runs dry, builds the habit of relying on the lifeline. The habits become the show. Over 20 seasons, the habits compound. And like in the long comparison, South Park versus Family Guy, American Dad versus Family Guy, storytelling versus gag delivery, the habits are the answer. Bonus section: the song that made people cry laughing. South Park's musical legacy. We touched on music earlier in this long night's journey, but music deserves a more focused examination because it is one of the dimensions of South Park that gets the least attention from the people who think about the show critically, and it is one of the dimensions where the creative achievement is arguably the highest. Most animated comedies treat music as a delivery mechanism. A song appears, it makes a joke, or references a style, it ends. The music is in service of the gag. Very few animated comedies have ever treated music as something more than that, as a form capable of achieving emotional effects that the show's other tools cannot achieve, as a dimension of the experience that justifies the investment of serious creative effort. South Park treats music this way, and the results, across 27 seasons and hundreds of original compositions, are remarkable. The technical sophistication of Parker's musical work is genuinely impressive. Blame Canada, from the Bigger, Longer, and Uncut film, is an accurate and affectionate pastiche of the kind of patriotic musical theater number that the American mid-century produced, complete with the specific harmonic moves and the specific rhythmic patterns of the form. It sounds like the thing it is parodying, which is the first requirement of good parody, but it also sounds like a real song, which is the requirement that most parody music fails to meet. When people hear it for the first time, they laugh. When they hear it again, they sing along. When they hear it a third time, they notice that it is actually well constructed. These are 3 different modes of engagement, and the song sustains all 3. Kyle's Mom is a Bitch works by a different mechanism. The song is a cheerful, almost jaunty show tune, in the mode of the big opening number from a 50s musical, all brass and energy and forward momentum, whose lyrics are a relentless and increasingly elaborate cataloging of a specific woman's failings. The contrast between the form, which is celebratory and energetic and performatively optimistic, and the content, which is extended brutal criticism, is itself the joke. But Parker's delivery of the song, with complete sincerity and commitment to the musical form, takes the joke past mere contrast and into something more interesting. A demonstration of how the aesthetics of performance can make almost any content seem appropriate, can impose a frame of celebration or mourning or triumph onto material that would otherwise be uncomfortable. The song from the Book of Mormon that most clearly demonstrates Parker's genuine compositional ability is I Believe, the climactic number in which the central missionary character reaffirms his faith in the most explicitly absurd possible terms, cataloging the literal theological claims of Mormonism in the form of an inspirational ballad with complete sincerity. The song is funny because the gap between the earnest musical form and the frankly strange content produces comedy. But the song is also genuinely moving, because by the time we reach this moment in the show, we have been given enough context to understand that the character's faith in these specific claims is not really the point. That what he is expressing through the vehicle of these specific claims is a genuine human need for meaning, for narrative, for the comfort of a coherent story about why we are here. The song works as comedy and as something that is not comedy at all, simultaneously. This is the hardest thing to do in musical theater. Parker does it. Family Guy has musical moments. The theme song is genuinely good. McFarlane's singing voice, as we have noted, is excellent. The show's engagement with music is sincere and informed. But the musical moments are, almost without exception, musical gags. Moments where music is used to deliver comedy, rather than genuinely developed musical storytelling. The show has not produced a song that works both as parody and as the thing being parodied. It has not produced a musical sequence that advances character or argument in the way that a great musical theater number does. The music is always in service of the joke, and the joke is usually a reference to something that already exists. This distinction between music as gag delivery and music as creative achievement in its own right is of a piece with every other distinction we have been drawing all night. It is the difference between a show that treats its tools as means to an end and a show that treats its tools as things worth developing for their own sake. South Park developed its musical voice over 27 seasons into something with genuine artistic integrity. The music matters. The songs are worth listening to. They do something. In the long quiet of this night, you might find yourself humming something. A melody that arrived with a joke and stayed past the joke. That is the sign of a song that actually works. A song that has separated from its original context and found life on its own. South Park produces those songs. That is not an accident. That is craft applied with consistency and love across decades in 6-day sprints of creative intensity that somehow, against all probability, keep producing things worth having. Bonus section. The shows that exist because of both of them. No creative work exists in isolation. Every significant piece of comedy or storytelling that achieves genuine cultural penetration changes the landscape for everything that comes after it. It raises the bar in some ways, lowers it in others, establishes new assumptions about what is possible or permissible or interesting. The influence of South Park and Family Guy on the animation and comedy that followed them is both enormous and slightly different in character. And examining that influence tells you something about the nature of each show's achievement. Family Guy's influence is primarily stylistic. The show established or popularized a set of comedy techniques. The rapid-fire cultural reference, the disconnected cutaway gag, the assumption of a culturally omnivorous audience that would get jokes about any corner of the entertainment landscape. That became, for a period, the dominant grammar of animated adult comedy. Shows like American Dad, Cleveland Show, Robot Chicken, and dozens of others are clearly working in the tradition that Family Guy established. The style was new enough and effective enough to be worth imitating, and a generation of comedy writers learned it and deployed it. But the influence of a style has a natural ceiling. Once a style has been established and widely imitated, the original version of it starts to look like what it is: a starting point rather than an end point, a foundation that later work has built on. The shows that have learned Family Guy's lessons about rapid-fire gag construction and then added something else, added storytelling or character depth or thematic ambition, have generally surpassed their model. Rick and Morty, which owes an obvious debt to the cutaway sensibility, while also telling deeply serialized stories with genuine emotional stakes, is a clear example of a show that took the Family Guy starting point and pushed it somewhere new. South Park's influence is harder to measure because it operates at a deeper level than style. The shows that are most clearly influenced by South Park are not the ones that look like it or sound like it. South Park's visual style is, after all, deliberately minimal, not something that invites imitation, but the ones that share its creative philosophy. The willingness to engage with current events in real time. The insistence on applying satire equally across the political spectrum. The choice to pursue uncomfortable truths rather than comfortable confirmations. The treatment of children as intelligence-capable protagonists who deserve to encounter genuine moral complexity. The willingness to make comedy and genuine feeling coexist without irony, defeating the feeling. You can see South Park's philosophical influence in shows that have nothing to do with animation, in the strand of comedy that runs through certain sketch programs, and late-night shows that are willing to be uncomfortable with their own audiences, that do not simply confirm the prejudices of the people watching. You can see it in the strand of YA fiction that treats young protagonists as capable of engaging with genuinely complex moral territory. You can see it most clearly in every corner of the comedy world that has decided that being genuinely honest is more important than being reliably liked. The shows that exist because of Family Guy are, in many cases, good shows. The shows that exist because of South Park are, in many cases, important shows. The distinction is worth drawing and worth sitting with. Good shows entertain, important shows change what is possible. Both kinds are necessary, but only one kind moves the art form. As we move through the dark of this late hour, let the landscape of influence settle around you like a city seen from above. All the shows and films and songs and books that exist because South Park and Family Guy existed. All the creative work that has been enabled or inspired or shaped by what two young men from Colorado and a young animator from Connecticut put into the world starting in the late 1990s. It is a significant landscape. It is a testament to the real impact of creative ambition meeting the right cultural moment. And somewhere in that landscape, the shows that most clearly carry South Park's DNA, the ones that pursue the honest and uncomfortable joke, the ones that are willing to be wrong in the service of trying something genuinely new, are doing the work that South Park made possible. That is the legacy, not just the Emmy Awards and the streaming numbers and the Broadway Tonys, the ongoing permission. The ongoing reminder that a comedy can be great, genuinely, lastingly great, if the people making it care enough to pursue greatness rather than settling for sufficiency. Care enough. In 6 days or 6 months, in any format, with any tools. Care enough and keep going. Bonus section. The question of comfort. Why Family Guy is still worth loving. We have spent a long night building a case, and by now the case has been made thoroughly enough that we can afford in this late hour to be generous. To step back from the argument for a moment and acknowledge something that the argument, if stated too bluntly, might obscure. Family Guy is worth loving. It genuinely is. Not in spite of its limitations, but in some cases because of them. Because the particular pleasures it offers are real pleasures. Pleasures that have a legitimate and valuable place in the economy of human entertainment. There is something to be said for comfort, for the familiar face, the reliable rhythm, the joke that you know is coming and that still makes you laugh because the timing is perfect and the voice is exactly right. There is something to be said for a show that does not demand too much, that does not require you to hold a season's worth of context in your head, that can be dipped into at any point and enjoyed without extensive preparation. Life is long and often hard, and sometimes you need 22 minutes of reliable entertainment rather than 22 minutes of creative ambition. Family Guy provides that. It provides it consistently over more seasons than most shows ever produce, with a cast and a voice and an aesthetic that are immediately recognizable and immediately pleasurable. The show has made millions of people laugh, has given them something to share with friends and reference in conversation, has been the company of late nights and sick days and long waits for things to happen. That is real service. That is a real contribution to the quality of people's lives, and it should not be dismissed in the heat of a critical argument. The best moments of Family Guy, the episodes that work completely, the gags that land perfectly, the interactions between characters that reveal genuine warmth, are genuinely good television. Stewie and Brian's dynamic, at its best, has a playfulness and an intelligence that is hard to find anywhere else. The show's musical set pieces, when they come together, can be genuinely delightful. The physical comedy, particularly involving Peter's specific kind of blundering physical presence, has moments of real and distinctive brilliance. MacFarlane's voice performance across 4 major characters is itself an extraordinary achievement that deserves separate recognition. Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire are 4 completely distinct vocal characterizations, and MacFarlane delivers all 4 with precision and consistency across hundreds of episodes. The technical skill of this is immense. Voicing a single animated character with consistency and depth is a demanding job. Voicing 4 of them simultaneously across decades, while also writing and producing and performing in live action, and singing and directing films, is a feat that deserves genuine admiration, regardless of how you feel about the creative choices behind the show. The show's fan base is real, and their loyalty is real, and loyalty this sustained and this passionate is not produced by mediocrity. Something in Family Guy connects to people in a way that is specific and deep and worth respecting. The show touched something in the culture, particularly in the early to mid-2000s when it was returning from cancellation, and YouTube was making it into the most clipped and shared comedy content on the internet. That mattered to the people it touched. So let the record show that the argument made tonight is not that Family Guy is bad. The argument is that South Park is better. And better does not mean good versus bad. It means more complete, more ambitious, more willing to reach for the harder thing, more likely to still be mattering to people 20 years from now in the ways that genuinely great art continues to matter. Not just as entertainment, but as illumination, as a lens through which some truth about being human is made visible. Both shows are worth your time. Both of them have given real things to the culture. But if you have a night to give to one of them, a long, quiet, curious night like this one, give it to the one that will still be surprising you at 3 in the morning. Give it to the mountains and the thin air and the 4 boys at the bus stop. Give it to the show that cares enough to still be trying, still be pushing, still be following the premise wherever it leads, even when the lead takes it somewhere uncomfortable. That is the show that earns a night like this. And it is the show we have spent this night honoring. Bonus section, The Butter's Philosophy. On innocence in a cynical world. One last character deserves one last extended look before we truly settle into the final quiet of this night. We have discussed Butters before, but there is more to say, because Butters' stodged across the seasons of South Park has become something that was never clearly intended in the early stages of his development. The show's conscience. Not Kyle's conscience, Kyle's conscience is practical and argumentative, engaged with the world and constantly activated by the things the world does. Kyle's conscience is hot, reactive, always in conversation, with the injustice happening right in front of it. Butter's conscience is different. It is passive. It is not engaged in argument. It is simply present, simply itself, radiating a quality of fundamental goodwill that persists regardless of what the world does to it. Butters has been manipulated by Cartman more times than any other character on the show. He has been convinced that the world is ending, that he is a superhero, that he is a girl, that he is a robot, that he is a pirate, that almost any premise Cartman invents is true. Because Butters' default assumption is that people mean what they say and that he should take them at their word. This credulity gets him into trouble constantly, sometimes devastating trouble. Locked in a bomb shelter, banished to a foreign country, humiliated in front of the school. The world treats Butters' trust as a vulnerability to be exploited. But here is what the show keeps showing us. Butters survives. He comes through every disaster with his essential nature intact. He is upset. He is sometimes genuinely hurt. But he does not become cynical. He does not stop trusting. He does not develop the defensive calluses that every other character on the show has developed to some degree. He remains open in a world that has given him every reason to close. This is a remarkable creative choice. Remarkable. In a show defined by satire, by the exposure of hypocrisy and pretension and self-deception, Butters is the figure who is genuinely sincere, who is not protecting himself from anything, who is not performing innocence but actually inhabiting it. He is the character who makes the cynicism of everyone else visible by contrast. When Cartman operates his schemes and Stan wearily explains what is wrong with the situation, and Kyle argues for justice and Kenny faces his perpetual mortality with stoic resignation, Butters is the one who is simply, persistently, inexplicably good. His goodness is not presented as naive. It is presented as a choice, not a conscious choice exactly, but a fundamental orientation, a way of being in the world that Butters has not been argued out of, despite abundant evidence that it makes him vulnerable. In this sense, he is the show's most spiritual character, the one who embodies something like grace, the gift that persists without being deserved or earned, that is simply present because it is what that person is. The episodes that center on Butters are often the show's most unexpectedly moving. There is a recurring Butters episode structure that goes like this. Butters is deceived or manipulated or mistreated by the world in some way. Butters accepts the consequences with his characteristic mixture of confusion and acceptance, and Butters arrives at the end of the episode still fundamentally himself, still capable of the same trust that made him vulnerable in the first place. The episodes should feel like tragedy, the good person perpetually punished for their goodness, but they consistently do not feel like tragedy. They feel somehow like victory, because Butters is still there, because the thing that makes him Butters is still intact. This is South Park's quiet argument against its own cynicism. The show's primary mode is satirical, and its primary target is human self-deception and pretension. But it keeps Butters alive, keeps him unchanged, keeps returning to him as a reminder that not everyone is a Cartman, that some people genuinely mean what they say and want what they claim to want and would not hurt you deliberately, that the cynical reading of human nature, however often confirmed, is not the whole picture. Family Guy does not have a Butters. It has a Meg, a character whose function is to absorb the cruelty of the world without it being clear whether the world's cruelty is wrong or simply accurate. Meg's suffering is played for laughs in a way that Butters' suffering never quite is. The difference is respect. The show respects Butters enough to let his goodness be real. The show does not respect Meg enough to let her suffering mean anything. This distinction between a show that respects its vulnerable characters and a show that deploys them is, in the end, a moral distinction as much as an aesthetic one. What a show does with its most vulnerable characters tells you what it actually believes about vulnerability, about goodness, about the people who are least protected from harm. South Park, for all its gleeful offensiveness, believes in Butters. It protects something in him even as it subjects him to catastrophe. That protection is the sign of a show that, beneath the satire and the shock and the equal opportunity discomfort, actually cares about people. Caring about people is the foundation of all great comedy. The jokes that last, the characters that endure, the shows that continue to find new audiences decades after they began, they're all built on this foundation. They are built by people who are not just trying to be funny, but trying to understand, through the mechanism of comedy, what it means to be alive and in company with other people who are also alive and also trying to make sense of things. South Park cares about people. It shows this in the most unexpected places, in the persistence of Butter's innocence, in the weight of Kyle's conscience, in the complicated love that Stan carries for his impossible father. These are the signs of care, and they are the reason the show still matters, still finds new audiences, still generates the sense. In a new viewer at 3 a.m, watching for the first time, that something important is happening here. Something important is. Something has been happening in a small, fictional mountain town in Colorado for 27 years that is worth all the time you want to give it. That is the argument. That is the whole of it. And now, at last, the argument is finished. And what remains is the night and the quiet, and whatever dreams arrive in the space that this long story has made. A final note before sleep. There is something about staying with a topic for a long time, longer than is strictly necessary, longer than a quick summary would require, longer than efficiency would justify, that produces a particular quality of understanding. Not just knowledge of the facts, but a feel for the thing. An intuition about how it works, why it matters, what it is for. The understanding you get from spending a night with something is different from the understanding you get from reading a paragraph about it. And the difference is not just quantitative. It is qualitative. It lives in a different part of you. Tonight we spent a night with 2 television shows. We turned them over slowly, looked at them from every angle, followed the arguments wherever they led. We were fair, I hope, to both of them. Generous to Family Guy's genuine achievements, rigorous about its genuine failures, honest about South Park's stumbles, thorough about South Park's triumphs. We were trying to see clearly, not to win a debate, and I hope the attempt came through. What I hope you take from this night, beyond the arguments and the examples and the character analyses and the production statistics, is something simpler and more personal. The reminder that the things we consume, the shows we watch, the songs we listen to, the stories we spend our time with, are worth thinking about. Not defensively, not to justify your preferences or to feel superior about your choices, but with genuine curiosity. They reveal something. They show you something about the people who made them, about the culture that produced them, about the values that the form rewards and the values it punishes. When you choose a show to spend time with, you are choosing more than entertainment. You are choosing a way of looking at the world for the duration of that experience. You are choosing the questions you will be asked and the answers you will be offered. And sometimes, on a quiet night, when the world is settled and the hours are long, you are choosing who you want to be keeping company with in the dark. I hope the company tonight was worth it. I hope the mountains of Colorado were good company, even imagined. I hope the boys were good company. I hope the argument was good company. Sleep well, and when you wake, the show will still be there. Still going, still asking questions it does not yet know how to answer, still, after all these years, alive.